With that, we will now go to the presentation, and I'll look to our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning to you and the other council members. This is definitely an important day, and I'm pleased to share the City of Austin's 2025-2026 proposed budget. As you know, I started this role as city manager in May of last year, so this is the first City of Austin budget that I've had the opportunity to guide from start to finish. It was certainly a challenging year to do so. As this council knows, due to the impacts of the state's cap on property tax rates, slowing sales tax revenue, and concerns over reductions in federal funding, we began this budget cycle with a $33 million shortfall in the general fund. But I am proud to say that through a close and critical look at all of our spending and revenues, what we are presenting to you today is a balanced budget. A budget where strategic decisions were made to realize savings and to increase investments in key areas. This is a good time to pause and thank the countless hours of work that went into this. It was no easy task. So many people played a role, from our assistant city managers to the directors, deputy and assistant directors, department financial staff, council members and their staff, and of course our budget team, who truly worked nonstop in the weeks leading up to this presentation. Many, many hours, talent and expertise go into every year, so I want to particularly thank our budget director, Director Carrie Lang, and her staff for their hard work. We could not do this work, or better stated, we should not do this work without the input of our community members, from our boards and commissions, to in-person and virtual meetings around the city, to citywide surveys. We made sure to listen, to respond, and to develop priorities around what Austinites told us, and it was very important to do so. Doing so helped us develop a budget that aligns with three critical focus areas: people, prioritizing engagement with our community and staff alike; places, strengthening our community's sense of place, creating a more livable, affordable, and resilient Austin; and finally, partnerships, building stronger partnerships with local, regional, and international partners. Some of the key areas of investment in this proposed budget include expanding shelter space for our neighbors experiencing homelessness and funding new positions to bolster the size of the team doing outreach and encampment management in our community; creating an essential new department, Austin's Art, Culture, Music, and Entertainment, to be the centralized hub for Austin's creative ecosystem; providing additional resources for emergency rental assistance to help people stay in their homes; additional funding for youth athletic fields and city pool maintenance; expanding emergency response operations and providing much-needed safety equipment for wildfire response teams; and increasing customer energy solutions and rebates and incentives. We also established the Human Rights Division in our Office of Equity and Inclusion, plus spending over $2.9 billion in our capital budget for critical infrastructure projects such as wastewater treatment facility improvements, the new convention center, and the expansion at Ostrom-Bergstrom International Airport, and more priorities that Austinites and the City Council let us know were important to them. We're also investing in our most valuable resource, our people, in proposing a 4% wage increase for City of Austin civilian employees and increasing the living wage from $21.63 an hour to $22.05 an hour. While challenging, I believe this is a budget Austin can be proud of. As you know, beginning last year, we started looking ahead in our budget planning. Instead of just focusing on the upcoming year, this biennial structure continues to secure and demonstrate the sustainable amounts of investments and ensuring we are managing uncertainty through strategic stewardship and transparency. As we plan ahead, not just for this year, but for years to come, we will continue to do so strategically while listening and responding to our community members and seek innovative pathways to ensure we are preserving, promoting, and progressing the values that define Austin. And with that, I will now turn it over to Carrie Lang and her team for the budget presentation. Carrie?
Thank you, City Manager. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Carrie Lang, Director of Budget and Organizational Excellence. I want to start today by echoing the City Manager's thanks to the team, starting with the department staff and directors for their collaboration and work with my team over the course of these last several months, and to thank my team for their work over these last several months and weeks to get us to this point today. We'll begin today by just talking through the agenda, all the things that we're going to be discussing. We'll start with just giving a quick overview of the timeline for the rest of the budget process. We'll then have a discussion on our overall city budget, our all funds overview, then go into general fund highlights, talk about our enterprise funds as well, and then finally we'll talk about the capital budget or spending plan for this coming year, and then next steps. So excited to have today to talk through the city manager's proposed budget and to talk through the things that we are proposing for next fiscal year and what our outlook looks like for the next several years. And then after today, we do have 5 other work sessions to talk through the elements of the budget, and finally budget adoption on August 13th. So when we look at our city's overall operating budget, we are at $6.3 billion for the city's total budget. That is a 5.1% increase from fiscal year 25. This increase that you see is primarily the results of growth in our utilities and our aviation department. Our utilities, Austin Energy and Austin Water, continue to be the largest portion of the budget at 43% of the city's total budget, with aviation growing to 7% this year of the budget. The general fund remains at 23% of our overall budget. And then internal services, our internal operations, such as support services, which houses the city manager's office, the law department, human resources, and finance, that along with fleet mobility, our capital delivery services, and our technology department, that is 23% of the budget. And then we have our smaller enterprise departments, which include watershed protection, convention center, they're about 11% of the budget, and then our general obligation debt service is 4%. So this slide here will talk about all of our citywide cost drivers that impact every department and every fund, most of the funds in the city. When we look at our health insurance, that is going to remain flat. The city's contribution to health insurance is remaining flat for fiscal year 26. And over the next several slides, we will show both the proposed fiscal year 26 and the planned year. And so in fiscal year 26, health insurance remains flat as far as the city contribution. We are anticipating a 5% increase in fiscal year 27 for the city's contribution. And the employees' premiums will remain flat for both of those years. We've worked really closely with our human resources department to really hone in on making sure we manage the employee benefits fund so that we won't have a number of ebbs and flows, big jumps or spikes in the funding for the employee benefit fund, and this is the result of some of that work. When we look at our wages, we are showing a 4% or proposing a 4% increase for civilians in fiscal year 26. And in fiscal year 27, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about the projections for fiscal year 27, but in order to help balance fiscal year 27, we are projecting no increases for civilians for the following fiscal year, for the planned year. We do have market study adjustments that we are planning for. So the annualized expenses for the trade titles that received market increases in fiscal year 25, we have those funded for fiscal year 26. And then there is a placeholder for citywide market study in fiscal year 27. Living wage will increase this fiscal year to $22.05. That's based on CPI. The Human Resources Department has set the methodology to increase living wage based on CBI, but do not exceed the across the board for civilians. And so in the past years and past several years, CBI was above the across the board planned wage. And so that's why you saw the living wage increase match the across the board. This year is at 1.94, and that is why it is at $22.05 for fiscal year 26. We do have a placeholder for fiscal year 27, and we will look at the CBI in January to determine what the next living wage increase will be. And then when we look at the process that we've put in place for making sure we review our vacancies across the city. A couple of years ago, we started looking at vacancies and eliminating those that were 2 years or older. In this fiscal year, we have 8 positions that had a long vacancy rate, and we'll continue that process. If you all will remember, when we started this a couple of years ago, the number was as high as about 135, 140 positions that were looked to eliminate, that we eliminated. And so the departments have done a really good job in looking at their vacancies and making sure they continue to hire in those positions. Moving forward to general fund highlights, the general fund is at $1.5 billion for fiscal year 26 proposed. That is a 3.7% increase. We have 13 departments in the general fund, and that includes the new arts, culture, music, and entertainment department. When we look at the general fund makeup, public safety remains the largest portion of the general fund at 64.5%. And is followed by our community services departments. That includes libraries, public health, parks and recreation. That is 26.8% of the total general fund. This $1.5 billion is a 3.7% increase, so that $23.1 million is the increase for fiscal year 25. These next couple of slides, I will talk about the incremental changes that you'll see in the general fund, as well as the planned incremental changes for fiscal year 27. The proposed the proposed 4% civilian increase results in $9.3 million increased cost for the general fund in fiscal year 26. Living wage is a $1.2 million increase for the general fund. Again, as I mentioned, health insurance will remain flat. The city's contribution will remain flat, so there's no increase there. And then the market studies that I mentioned earlier is $900,000 in fiscal year 26, and then $5 million for the citywide in fiscal year 27. And then the city's retirement contributions. This is for the City of Austin employee retirement system. It's $3.9 in next fiscal year, and then $800,000 in fiscal year 27. For our sworn employees, that's EMS, police, and fire. EMS and police, they have their agreed upon wage increases per their meet and confer or labor agreements. And so EMS is looking at a 3% increase in both fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. The police increase is $13.2 million or 6% in fiscal year 26, and then 5% in fiscal year 27. In addition to the wage increases, the city support for the police retirement system, you will see that at $1.3 million, the legacy liability payment for that system, as well as the city's annual contribution is $3.7 for next fiscal year. Austin Fire Department, we have a placeholder in place because the department is currently beginning negotiations for the wage or the employee contract with the association. And then we do have a $2.6 million increase for the the fire retirement system based on the reforms that were taking place in the most recent legislative session. Then we're looking at the cost allocations that are directly impacted the general fund. Looking at support services, again, those internal services departments that support the operations of the city, that's $6.8 million for next fiscal year. Our IT department, technology services, is $6.4 million increase. And then CTEC, which primarily supports the public safety facilities or the public safety functions, is a $1 million increase. The other allocations across the general fund include our fleet maintenance, our capital delivery services, wireless, as well as our liability reserve. And then finally, this transfer to the budget stabilization reserve fund. In fiscal year 25, we had a $1.5 million transfer into that fund, and this is showing that incremental change because we're not doing that transfer in fiscal year 26. So as the city manager mentioned, this budget required some really strategic looks at both our investments for the upcoming fiscal year and what spaces or areas we would be able to make some reductions or reallocations. And department staff worked over several months to identify what their core services were or what services were that they were providing that may be further from their core services. And with that input and that insight and conversations, the next several slides will walk through both the new investments that we were able to make in fiscal year 26, as well as some reductions that were put in place. So with the EMS department, we are annualizing the cost of the positions for the opening of the Canyon Creek Fire EMS station. Similarly, in fire, we are analyzing the cost for those sworn employees. We also have increases in fire for their wildfire shelters and equipment. That is a $280,000. There's also an $8.3 million savings in fire in overtime based on the planned restructuring of some of the fire model. And then there's one time that was funded in fiscal year 25 that we are continuing in fiscal year 26. That is one time that is funded through the Budget Stabilization Reserve Fund for the continuation of the third cadet class that was added this fiscal year, as well as the replacement of their breathing apparatus for the firefighters. In forensic science, they are receiving 5 new positions for the new warehouse that is opening. And then in municipal court, you see this $3.5 million reduction. That is the result of the magistration services moving over to the county. And so the savings you see in municipal court offsets that increase that you see in the police section, where it says $6 million for the Travis County ILA for magistration. The net increase for that contract is $2.5 million. And then in police as well, you see a $9 million savings on overtime because of the restructuring that was rolled out on staffing in the staffing model that was rolled out in June. And then finally, there was some savings that was identified because the Blue Santa warehouse will be moving to a city-owned facility. Moving on to our homelessness and housing functions, our homeless strategy and operations department has $8 million in one-time funding to support the continued operation of the marshalling yard. That funding is coming from the Housing Trust Fund in fiscal year 26. And then $3.5 million of ongoing funding for the continued operations of the 8th Street Shelter. In addition, 12 new positions was added to Homeless Strategy Office to allow for more outreach and encampment management engagement. And then in housing, $1.7 million additional dollars was added through the Housing Trust Fund for a total of a $5 million investment, a $5.7 million investment for 374 units in fiscal year 26. That includes 170 new units for that program. And then $500,000 was also added in one-time funds for the displacement mitigation plan, as well as an increase in investment in the emergency rental assistance, $400,000 increase for a total $4 million investment for emergency rental assistance. And then planning is receiving 2 positions for financial support and to assist with the development of the district and comprehensive plan. Moving forward to community services. Animal Services is receiving 4 new positions, 2 animal protection officers, and 2 support positions for their department. And then there's a $586,000 reduction in contracts for emergency and specialty surgeries. This is not going to be a reduction in services provided, but the department has said that this is services that they can continue to support with current staffing. And then arts, culture, music, and entertainment. The new department is receiving 5 new positions for financial and managerial support. Parks and Recreation, as you all remember, received 20 positions in fiscal year 25. It was partial year funding, so this is annualizing the cost of those 20 positions. And they are also receiving $375,000 for youth athletic field maintenance for our fields that are adjacent to our recreation centers. And then 2 positions for pool maintenance at Colony Park Pool and to help support the maintenance at the other pools across the system. Our library department is receiving $400,000 for additional security at the libraries. And then $216,000 for additional materials. And then finally, there is a restructuring of the Recycle Reads program. So they are going to realize savings in closing that site of the Recycle Reads. However, they're expanding that program across the system to allow for that program to be available at each of the branches. And then finally, public health is recognizing $3.4 million in savings as they have moved staff from Bergstrom Tech into the Grove. So as we look at our general fund reserves, in order to get to a balanced budget this year, we transferred $14.1 million from the general fund, budget stabilization reserve fund, into the operations of the general fund. And that support allowed us to maintain all of our major programs and services without cutting in this fiscal year, particularly our social service contracts. We are looking at, we need to look at how we can do best to sustain those services. And so that $14.1 million will allow for all of our social service contracts to remain at level for fiscal year 26. When we move forward to fiscal year 27 and the things that we needed to do to balance, in addition to the elimination of our civilian wages that I mentioned earlier, it would also require a elimination of about $16.8 million of social service contracts in fiscal year 27 to remain balanced, along with a reduction or elimination of our transfer to our housing trust fund, as well as a reduction or elimination of our transfer to our capital rehabilitation fund. But when we continue to look at reserves for fiscal year 26, we are proposing that we end the fiscal year at 15.8%. That is under our 17% policy. However, those dollars were needed again to help us balance in what we understand to be economic constraints that we're seeing as a city, and it is within our financial policy that allows us to do so. In fiscal year 27, we do not anticipate any additional increases or transfers into the Budget Stabilization Reserve Fund or to our reserves, and so our reserve balance will be at 15.4. We will start looking at how we can transition that into rebuilding that reserves in fiscal year 28. So this slide here really talks through, as we begin to transition and talk about our revenue. We wanted to start off with looking at, when we see our revenue in general, the breakout of all the revenue sources that we have compared to how our our expenses or requirements are required over the year. We see that when we look at our public safety departments, police, fire, and EMS, compared to that inner circle that shows our property tax, sales tax, other revenue, and utility transfers, our public safety functions take up all of the revenue from our property tax revenue, as well as 68.3% of our sales tax revenue. And so this is just to kind of give us an idea of how our spending and how our budget aligns with our revenue, and the things that we really need to look at and consider as we're trying to make sure we have the dollars and funding available to provide all of our core services and programs for the city. And I will turn it over to Eric Nelson, Deputy Director, to talk through our revenue.
Good morning, everyone. General fund continues to rely primarily on property tax, and that also limits the overall growth because of the constraints that our property tax revenue is under. Most of our marginal investment in recent years has been through strong sales tax results. Unfortunately, those results are now trending slightly negative. One bright spot in this year's revenue projections are a big increase in the utility transfers, and then the growth in other revenue is primarily driven by that $14.1 million transfer from reserves that Carrie just spoke to. As we move towards a little deeper discussion on property tax, this just provides some context about how the impact to our typical homeowners has been trending. We spiked up in FY21 as a result of the Project Connect TRE, but since that time we've been trending downwards back to the sort of low middle of the pack where we have tended to be, and that's been driven because we've seen both a decline in the median sales price the past 2 years and also some pretty strong growth in median incomes. Looking at the tax rate itself, we project a rate of 52.76 cents. That's a 5-cent increase from the current rate. The state's cap is a revenue cap, so the rate will adjust in response to values. So the primary reason why that rate is increasing is because TCAT is projecting a decline in total taxable value in the city. Net of expected protest loss, the projections from the appraisal districts have us at about $227 billion in taxable value in 26, which would be almost a 4% decline from the prior year. Even more crucially for our revenue is that new property taxable value. Last year we had a record $5.4 billion. The tax from that value is not subject to the cap, and so that can drive a lot of incremental investment. But after that record value, we're seeing it fall by more than half, or almost half, to $2.3 billion this year, which is the lowest result we've seen since FY17. Looking at the projected bill, with respect to the non-senior typical homeowner, we're looking at about a 7.9% increase. Now, we often talk about the 3.5% increase, but the reason that the typical homeowner will be higher than that is because their values, while declining, are not declining as fast as the city's overall taxable value, so they are going to absorb a little more of the tax burden. And that is primarily driven because of the effect of the assessed value cap. Almost 29% of homesteads still have cap value. That is down from 70% in the prior year, so it's being worked off. But until it totally disappears, we can expect the median homeowner's value to rise faster than the city. Seniors, as a result of the action council took to increase the homestead exemption, will see a small decline year over year in their projected tax bill. And one other factor driving these increases is the increase in the city's debt associated with prior bond issuances. So about 60% of this increase is on the M&O rate and about 40% from the debt rate. Moving to sales tax, we've received 8 payments for this fiscal year, and we're sitting at just slightly negative 0.3%, which is $10.5 million below budget. For the rest of the year, we expect to end up in the about a 0.5% decline range, which would put us $15 million below budget. Unfortunately, we expect there to be pretty weak results into FY26 as economic uncertainty and general economic sluggishness continue. We are looking at a 1% decline, further decline in FY26. And interestingly, we continue to lag our peer cities who are seeing stronger results. The graph on the bottom shows how we were trending during the prior fiscal year, and we were optimistic when we were sitting here last year. But as we moved into FY25, we saw those results fall off, and we sounded the alarm with council during our financial forecast. Looking out over our forecast period, we do expect a moderate recovery as we approach the later years of the forecast. Working with our economic consultant, we think we can expect a return to the 2 to 3% range, but it remains to be seen whether we'll ever see that consistent 5 to 7% growth that we experienced for the better part of a decade prior to the pandemic. One bright spot in the revenue forecast are these utility transfers. As a result of customer growth and some recent rate increases, we're seeing a significant increase here, $13.4 million in this year, an additional $16.4 million looking into proposed. Over the forecast period, we're going to expect these transfers to grow a little over 4%, which will keep pace with expected growth in the general fund expenditures. As I mentioned before, with respect to other revenue, this is kind of our bucket for everything that's left over. That's mainly being driven in FY26 by this one-time transfer from the BSRF. We've also seen some good results from EMS. We added some staff in recent fiscal years to improve their billing efficiencies, and that's paid off. That's driving about a $5 million increase. And we've also trued up their transport fees and their fees for standby at special events, and that's generating a little over $4 million in projected revenue. The growth slows down in the out years because we have interest results rolling into this category. And while the timing appears delayed, I think we can expect in coming years for rates to be at a lower average level than they are now, and that weighs on the total growth in this category. Finally, this is our chart that summarizes the revenue versus expenditure picture for the whole general fund over our forecast period. We've introduced the 2-year budget plan, so we have balanced budgets in 26 and 27, but we have expanding deficits thereafter. I think since SB2 passed, this has been a consistent story, and our lever is sort of sales tax results, and if we're above that 5 to 6% level, we may just be balanced or have a few dollars for new investments. But if it falls off below that, the limitations on the property tax mean that we start to see gaps widen versus our base cost driver forecast.
Next, we'll begin talking about our enterprise departments and give some highlights over their projected or proposed budgets for next fiscal year. We have 8 enterprise departments that we'll talk through over the next several slides. Beginning with aviation. Aviation has a $292.5 million budget for fiscal year 26. That is a 3.4% increase. They are anticipating 24 new positions to support expansion of their services or their newly renovated areas, including work in custodial, terminal, and grounds maintenance, as well as the West Infield and Westgate expansion projects. The $64 million transfer is to further support the expansion and their infrastructure projects at the airport. They are anticipating $77.2 million in additional revenue because of the anticipated agreement with the airlines. And the increase is primarily based on the airport changing the methodology to better be in line with industry standards on how they reach agreements with the airlines. And then a $3 million decrease in resources or revenue related to parking, as well as interest income in the coming year. In the planned year, they are anticipating additional increases in their revenue, $40.1 million. They are anticipating 20 additional positions to further support the new facilities, and then a reduction in operational expenses of $2.2 million because of the closing of the South Terminal. The convention center is $125.3 million. They are decreasing because of their closure as they go through their expansion and redevelopment. They are eliminating 27 vacant positions due to the closure, and then they do see some operational savings, again, based on where they are in the redevelopment process. They are continuing to transfer dollars to their CIP for the expansion project. We are anticipating that the Palmer Event Center will actually see an increase in revenue because of their events that are scheduled over the next fiscal year. And then when we look at our hotel occupancy tax, we are anticipating a decrease or a decline from budget to budget because we are not receiving as much hot revenue as we anticipated in this fiscal year, but we anticipated flattening out the $2.2 million in fiscal year 27. And this slide also shows where all the different places that the hot tax goes to, the different funds it supports, from cultural arts to convention center capital to historic preservation, tourism, and promotion. Our development services department is increasing to $110.6 million. This includes our development services fund and our code fund. When we look at the code fund, $37 million of expenditures are funded by the clean community fee. The code division is anticipating 5 new positions from Austin Resource Recovery for the enforcement of the Uniform Recycling Ordinance. The clean community fee will increase 10 cents for both fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. And there is funding in fiscal year 27 for 6 additional positions for the graffiti abatement program. The Development Services Fund has continued to see a reduction in revenue. They are continuing to work on right-sizing the department and really look at how they need to create a space where they can ebb and flow and respond to the changes that happens in development. They've reduced 45 positions in the Development Services Fund, and they're going to augment their teams with temporary or contractual staffing or funding to help with the ebbs and flow again of development. We will continue to work with the Development Services Department. The team has done a lot of work to really look at what needs to be done to right size not only the size of the department, but look at the cost of service and the fees and make sure that we are charging appropriately for the services provided. And we'll continue to do that work over the coming months and years as we work to make sure that in the long term, the Development Services Fund will be able to continue to support itself. Austin Energy, our utility is at $2 billion. That is a 5.8% increase from this fiscal year. They are increasing 32 positions across the department. Some of the costs related to those positions is offset because they are transferring contracted or temporary employees into full-time, so they're reducing their contractual costs in order to increase these new positions. They also have $3.7 million for their Customer Energy Solutions Rebates and Incentives Program. They will be experiencing increased expenses of $13.5 million for their share of the South Texas Nuclear Plant and Fayette Power Project, and then increased costs from ERCOT as well as what they'll see in fiscal year 26. The Austin Energy anticipates a 5% base rate increase in 27 and 20 new positions across that system in 27. When you look at the fiscal year 26 rates, you can see that it decreased 4% for fiscal year 26 to $117.07.
Answer, they may have some money.
Austin Resource Recovery, $146.6 million budget for fiscal year 26, a 9% increase. This includes new positions, 3 new positions for litter abatement at $248,000, 3 new positions for the furniture reuse warehouse, and then a position for organizational training. The Clean Community Fee will remain flat for fiscal year 26 and have a 10-cent increase for fiscal year 27. The residential collection fee will increase 7.5% in fiscal year 26 to $36.30. And then there's an additional $1.30 increase in fiscal year 27. And the department is also increasing their temporary and contractual staffing to augment some of the staffing levels to make sure they can maintain their service levels for the next fiscal year. Moving forward to the Transportation and Public Works Department at a $243.1 million budget. They are increasing $900,000 for their construction partnership. They are also increasing 12 positions to maintain their current service levels and to work on critical infrastructure projects. The TPW budget includes a reduction in funding for the Neighborhood Partnering Program, and it also includes an increase in their fees in the transportation user fee of 9.9%, which totals $1.96. In fiscal year 27, they have mainly the cost drivers, the citywide cost drivers at $4.4 million, but they do anticipate an 8.4% increase in the transportation user fee. Austin Water, our water utility, has an $850 million budget, is increasing 9.9%. Their budget is primarily increasing, if you can see that, $48.8 million to fund their capital and debt service requirements. They are adding 18 positions, new positions, and then 13 temp to perm conversions in fiscal year 26. Their rate will increase 9.6% that's an increase of $8.71. And in fiscal year 27, they anticipate adding an additional 31 positions with a 7.8% increase to their rate. And then finally, watershed protection is at $127.8 million, a 4.5% increase for next fiscal year. They're adding 14 new positions and at $2 million. And then they are implementing their storm drain rehabilitation program at $300,000. The drainage user fee is a 67-cent increase or 5% increase for next fiscal year. The Watershed Protection Department also anticipates increasing 14 new positions and an 8.6% or $1.20 increase to the drainer user fee. So now that we've walked through all of our enterprise departments, as well as talk through the general fund. This is the typical impact to the typical rate and taxpayer. We're showing a combined impact of 4.9% for fiscal year 26. This 4.9%, as you can see, includes the property tax bill increase, as well as all of the rate increases or the fee increases that we've discussed. And it also talks about by defining what the typical rate or taxpayer is. So each fee has a definition to get to this point. When we look at the increase, we see for fiscal year 26, it is a $22.35 per month increase. And then for fiscal year 27, it's $28.56. Moving forward to our capital discussion. So the 26 budget includes a spend plan of $13.2 billion through fiscal year 30. This is our 5-year spend plan. As you can see, when you look at fiscal year 26 and 27, the large increases, we have a number of large projects going on across the city. I've spoken about the convention center, expansion and redevelopment, aviation. The airport is doing large projects in their expansion. We continue to have work being done on our bonds that have been approved. So Transportation Public Works has a number of projects, corridor projects across the city. And then Austin Water and Austin Energy continue to do their capital and infrastructure projects to continue the utility services. This is a breakdown, again, of the spend plan for next fiscal year based on the types of projects or the departments who have the largest projects. Again, as you can see, aviation with their expansion takes up 28.6% of the spend plan for next year. Austin Water and Austin Energy continue to have a large portion, and then the convention centers with their expansion is 13%. This slide walks through our bond programs, the financial summary of our prior year bond programs. As you can see, we go back to 2006 through 2013. Those programs are primarily or mostly completed. And then when you go into our mobility projects or programs that started in 2016, you see that we have still about $200 million that is still available balance in the 2016 program. 2018, we have $130 million still available, and then you look at 2020, $176 million, and that is, you see that reflected also in the spend plan that I showed you over the 5-year spend plan over the previous slide, where we're trying to spend those dollars down over the next 5 years. The 2022 bond program is our housing bond, and we are making good progress on those projects so far. Some of the highlighted spending for our capital programs, and specific projects that these departments are trying to make progress in next fiscal year. Aviation is looking at the Midfield Taxiway, $197 million, as well as the West Garage Lot B construction. Convention Center, $361 million for the expansion project. Water is doing work on the Walnut Creek wastewater treatment plant. That's $54 million. And then Austin Energy has $106 million for transmission projects. And then finally, Transportation Public Works, $76 million for corridor program projects across the city from the 2016 mobility bond. So with that, we'll start talking through some of the next steps. Again, we begin work sessions next Wednesday with community input. These work sessions will be focused on general fund departments next week. If there are particular departments or topics that the council would like for us to bring forth, please let us know so that we can make sure we have the right staff here and that we are prepared to have those conversations. On the 29th, we will focus on enterprise and CIP as our discussion. And then the 31st, there will be a public hearing at 3 p.m. And there is opportunity for additional discussion on the work session as well. And the council will be setting the max tax rate. August 4th is the deadline for all council budget questions, amendments, and IFCs. And then on the 7th, we will hear from council as you all walk through your budget amendments and resolution recommendations. And then just so you all will know, the council budget questions portal is opening today. We will send you all an email to make sure you all have a link to the form for the council budget questions, as well as send you the forms for the amendment. So that email will go out today. We have several supporting documents, including the boards and commissions recommendation report that we will be distributing by the end of this week. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Members, let's go to questions, and if you want to be in the queue, what I'm going to do is look for you to be in the queue. And as you do that, keep in mind that everybody's probably going to have questions. So when you start your questions, I'll pay you a little bit of attention to the clock. Don't want to cut anybody off, but to keep things rolling for everybody, I may give you the high sign after a certain amount of time. One of the things that while y'all are getting yourselves in the queue, what I'll do is ask Ms. Lang, I'd like you to go to page 37 of the report, because I want there to be transparency, and I don't want there to be any confusion about where we are in the budget process and consideration. We're not posted to get into final determinations about potential revenues, additional revenue, and things like that. But of course, there's been a community discussion about some of that, including council talking about it frequently and the Audit and Finance Committee talking about it. And there's been some confusion, I think, as the budget got laid out by the manager's office, that when it's called a balanced budget, and it is indeed a balanced budget, it's as though there isn't any sort of tax increase in that maybe the council will consider tax increases, but this budget proposal doesn't. But so as a result of that, I want to make sure that we are clear on a couple of things. One is this proposed budget does, in fact, raise the tax rate to the maximum tax rate allowed by law.
Yes, that is correct.
And that's why on the property tax bill down on page 37, for 26, you see an increase and then an additional increase in 27.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I just want, as we start this process, I want to make sure that that's built into it. And if we look at the totals there for the typical rate and taxpayer, that's a monthly total.
Correct.
And the anticipation is that monthly total will go up to that total in the next year.
Yes.
Good deal. Okay. Not good deal, but I want to. Good deal. We understand. I just want to make sure that that's all out there and clear, because I want to make sure also for those that are paying attention to this is the way this process is supposed to work. The manager proposes under our charter a budget. It is supposed to be a balanced budget. The way he, I think, appropriately reads the requirements of the charter is that he is supposed to have a balanced budget and do it the way he's done that. It's not a competition then that the council comes in and tries to just add revenue. And so I want to make sure that as it's being reported on and as the public looks at it, they see that this is the way the process is supposed to play out. And anyway, so you want to say anything else about that?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for clarifying, I think, the impact on the recommended budget and the tax rate as well as proposed revenues, which are increasing about 3.5%. And you are correct, particularly as it relates to how the team and I approach this budget. One of the things we did not want to do, consistent with the charter actually, is to prepare a budget that this council then has the decision points and the ability to raise and or change and set tax rates higher. And we did not want to presume any of the latter as it relates to boxing the council in on their considerations of what to do with the budget. And so, again, I appreciate council listening this morning, and we are here to hopefully clarify any questions that you might want to ask.
Yeah, because if you did that, then we would have to might have to unwind stuff and things of that nature. So that's why it's this way. And so I appreciate you're also clarifying that. Again, we're not posted to have a discussion about where a tax rate election or things like that might play out. But there's obviously there obviously will be some discussion about that. And I want to emphasize what I was saying earlier when we first opened the meeting, and that is we don't know where all that ends up. But that's part of any discussion that's a transparent discussion about the needs of our city, about the affordability needs of our city, things of that nature. So with that, I'll call on Councilmember Lane, and she has the floor, followed by the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Kadri.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to start first by thanking our city manager, Carrie Lang, and the entire budget team for presenting to us a budget that is balanced without a TRE as a starting point, that finds ways to invest strategically in our core city services and some of the gaps in city services that have already persisted for too long. I really appreciate that. I also, I really appreciate seeing the beginning of some of the restructuring that will lead to savings that can be invested in what we as a city view as our core values, and also, again, ensuring that our entire city gets the benefit of some of these priorities and spending. Also, very much appreciate a 2-year look forward rather than a 1 year, so that we can see where we're going a little bit farther out in such challenging times. With that, I'll turn to questions. The first is related to page 15, the 15.8% reserve level. Maintaining a reserve level, as you know, that maintains our highest financial rating is a high priority for me. And I would be remiss if I did not also thank you for the priority that you, City Manager Broadnax, have put on capital deliveries, so we can get some of that off the books to help us with our reserve rating. But I still would love for you to walk me through, whoever is the right person, what percentage level do we need to maintain reserves at in order to maintain our financial rating? If Clara, yeah, that's right. That's probably.
Ed Bandino, Chief Financial Officer. That is a nuanced question, Council member, in the sense there is not a magic number around reserves. The General Governmental Finance Officers Association recommends a reserve level of 60 days, which kind of equates to roughly 17%, which is what our policy level is at. Rating agencies are looking at things more broadly in regards to what is your financial resiliency, what is your flexibility to respond to economic shocks or disasters. And so depending upon your circumstances as a city, a reserve level more than 17% may be necessary, or less than 17% may be necessary. In our conversations with the rating agencies, I think our policy is the right policy level. We are proposing a budget that's below that policy level, but it is in line with our financial policies that break it up into an emergency reserve and a budget stabilization reserve. The reason we do that is so that when we have economic shocks like sales taxes slowing down, or budgetary shocks like federal grant monies going away, that we have the flexibility to respond with that without having to make drastic changes. And so I think 17% is the right number. It doesn't create me great concern to propose a budget below that this year, knowing that our financial policies do call for us to restore that in the future. And as Ms. Lang mentioned, that would be our intent to start restoring those reserves to the policy level beginning in fiscal year 28.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, the reserves level at the financial rating are certainly important for doing the most with the least amount of money in the future. So I definitely value that. I appreciate what I've seen in the budget and through my conversations with Chief Baker around wildfire planning, that we are doing things that also hit on that disaster, natural disaster piece, as well as working hard with the federal government around our federal funding around flooding and FEMA and that sort of thing. I would like a follow-up question on this, however, and when we were discussing cap and stitch, and Kim Oliveris was, the person at the front at that time, I expressed some concerns about the risk that the city was exposing itself to by taking on so much of such a large percentage of the financial responsibility for cap and stitch projects, and also the risk associated with the increasing cost because of inflation and a variety of unknowns. And so if you have any comments about the extent to which those factors have been considered as you look at financial rating preservation.
Yeah, that certainly plays into our calculations, not just cap and stitch, but our overall liability levels, our debt loads, the prospective 2026 bond that's been discussed, the existing authorized but unissued bonds that voters have already approved that still have to work their way through the system, and we have to go out to market to issue those bonds. So that is an important consideration in our financial ratings, which is essentially our debt to income ratios is a very important consideration. Ours are high. We are working hard to manage that. It's not just about issuing bonds. It's also about the financial stability of our pension systems, our post-employment benefits. We've made a lot of progress on those fronts, as you are aware, at the state legislature to start managing those liabilities over the long term. In terms of the risk of cap and stitch, there's certainly a risk in regards to cost escalation. There always is on any major project. I know our Public Works Director, Transportation Public Works Director is here, and I've had conversations with him that I think we're confident, feeling good. We've done a thorough review of the cost estimates, and for the level of design stage we're at, we're building in contingency in the event there is cost escalation. Of course, the intent here is for that project to not fall squarely on the shoulders of the city, that we have committed to building the vertical infrastructure. We're going to be working on alternative financing plans, looking at all sorts of avenues from TIFs to public-private partnerships, economic development opportunities in order, philanthropy to try to get those caps and stitches built in a manner like they have been in other cities, largely funded through a collaboration between city sources and non-city sources. So we're doing all that work. Certainly, if that doesn't happen and the only avenue for building the caps and stitches, and it was council direction, was to move forward with that would require some type of bond proposition in the future to get voter approval for that, which of course then would add financial pressures to our credit rating, or it would mean we'd have less money to fund other priorities. But again, that's not our intent. Our intent is to find other sources of funding beyond the city coffers.
Our staff has worked long and hard to do exactly what you're saying. I hear it from you. I've also spoken with ACM Rogers quite a bit about these issues and concerns, and I appreciate that very much. I will highlight that at the point, once we go past, there's still a little space, but at a certain point, my understanding of the way those contracts are structured are that we, as Austin, assume the liability for all cost increases to construction costs. And so once we have taken the additional steps that are coming, that, we'll fully assume that a liability. It won't matter if we see it coming or not. It won't matter if it makes it to a bond or not. Our city will be liable for them. I see you nodding. Sorry. That's great, but that is an important consideration for me to make sure that it comes out. And part of the reason that I say that is because the passions were very high during the discussions of Cap and Stitch for quite some time. And a big piece of the success of this is attracting the private philanthropy dollars, for which many of our council members are, spoke eloquently about the need and the way that that money could come in, the private philanthropy. And I hope that I'm happy to be part of those conversations as they develop, but I also just want to highlight we need to look at how fast costs are rising, and that might be a good consideration to maybe have periodic updates on through Mobility Committee, where we see those figures a lot. Thank you. Done with that part. I also have a question on page 19. Whoops, sorry. I am wondering why Austin is trailing peer cities on sales tax results in 2025. Sales tax is obviously, and y'all explained it very clearly, a very important part of our financial forecasts, and I'd just like to understand what it is that is causing us to be trailing our peer cities.
Councilmember, you said page 15, but I think you're talking about
Page 19?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Then I misunderstood you. That's a property tax one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's why.
Okay, so it was
I think 21.
21, I think.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
I think that's an important question, and I don't think we have a clear answer. I think part of the factors that we may be a little more tied to development and tourism and travel, and those have suffered particularly with the recent economic conditions and tariff-related global order uncertainty. I think another factor is if you look at the next slide, 22, we had such a strong recovery. You can't even call it a recovery. We had an explosion after the pandemic where I think a lot of people chose to come here. We could work from anywhere. We saw a massive run-up in housing prices, and we saw over 21% growth in the sales tax. Those other cities didn't see that. In the long term, you can see even with our sort of anemic growth that we're forecasting, we would still average out to almost 5% a year over 10 years just because of that massive run-up. So I think we're working from such a high base now that it's more difficult to grow.
That makes sense. I have some additional theories. I'd be happy to connect about it at some point. Okay, so I believe page 18 is the property tax modeling, and that I probably should look at it to make sure I'm not steering you all astray. Begins a little earlier, actually, page 18. So the property tax modeling is obviously quite important as well. I appreciated seeing the graphs on the median home value and the discussion around some of the impacts of homestead exemption versus rental. I want to highlight that as Austin has been transitioning towards a more and more renter base of population, I think you probably got that covered, but want to make sure we see the shifts there. But the question that I have is, commercial property tax is a huge segment, and can you tell me a little bit about how that's disaggregated in the models that you're using?
So when we look at 26, we have the noticed rolls from TCAD and from the other appraisal districts, and then we're using their expectation of protest loss. So it's based on the actual notices that went out, not just a pure forecast. I can say that just based on the way it's shaking out with the median, the commercial is going to come down a bit faster than the residential is, and that's part of why you see that 7.9% increase for the resident when maybe you would expect a 3.5.
If you're interested in talking more about that at some point,
Yeah,
I'm happy to.
Of course.
Okay. Page 31 is development services. I don't have a question on this page. I just have a comment. I am very happy to see the work that is already going on in relation to restructuring, finding our savings, looking at the fee structure and how that needing it to remain solvent. And also, I believe I'm seeing between the lines, making sure that we're also having that department and the spending and the fees support our values as a city and where we're trying to get to, not just maintaining cash flow. So I appreciate that very much, and I definitely would be remiss if I did not thank Dr. Johnson for what I'm sure is work in that area already. Thank you. Page 34, the construction partnership program to coordinate construction activity. I thank very much our transportation and legal staff for speaking with me and giving me more context around how we got where we are. Very useful. I like seeing an investment in this area. I believe it was 0.9 million. My question is that allocation enough to integrate District 6's construction projects more fully into this coordination? I'll give you some examples. There are many arterials and even highways that go through District 6 that are in the ETJ or limited purpose zoning. And while they are not inside the city, the homes that are behind them, where the residential areas are, frequently must use them in order to get anywhere. And frequently where they're going is work or taking their kids to school. And so if while these roads and the developers and including affordable housing developers and those that we support are not in full purpose Austin, the people who use them are people who live and work in the city. And so I'll give, and to give an example that's quite recent and topical, in the recent flooding that impacted Kerrville and impacted some of our suburbs north of Austin pretty dramatically, a section of 360 is also washed out and now under construction. And when that happened, we had a cut through that was already blocked for construction, and now the way above to connect through is also blocked for construction. So we've lost a lot of access there. Also, Williamson County being 60% of the district and not having them integrated into the original set of partners that we're working with most fully. This is the context on why I am wondering, for these types of issues, is this enough to integrate our district more fully and bring us back onto the map as how we are helping our citizens navigate all of these construction areas? And that probably might be a question for Assistant Manager Rogers if I had to get. Oh, yes, please. Long time no see. Okay.
Morning, Mayor and Council. Councilmember Lane, thank you for your question. Richard Mendoza, Transportation Public Works Director. So the construction partnership program, to answer your question, is actually a multi-agency effort to coordinate and disseminate construction information to our community to include a region-wide approach. So City of Austin, for the last couple of years, has been working very closely with our partners, including TxDOT, CTRMA, surrounding counties, Campo, and Cat Metro, getting ready for this construction Armageddon, if you will, around mobility. And so I do expect that the benefits of the CPP will reach your district.
So just to bring forward one of the examples that I laid out, I love a lot of what I'm seeing in this project. Big time supporter. You already have TxDOT as a primary partner, but the washout of 360 doesn't show up on the betas that I'm looking at. And there are other construction areas that are quite active and signs that new ones are coming that aren't reflected. And I do think that I know that there was early consideration of including Williamson County in the initial set of partners and that did not happen. But some of this lies in areas where additional coordination with Williamson County probably would be helpful, not at the council member level, but at the staff and planning and partnership level. And so the allocation you already have is adequate.
Yes, it is for this phase of the program. And that's good feedback. I will take that back to the project team.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I've got a couple more. The next one's related to parks. For the PARD programs that are listed in the fiscal year 26 objectives, could I get a little bit more information about how staff prioritize projects for investments in this year's budget? Am I getting up on time? Should I pause?
You've been over 15 minutes.
I will hold the rest of my questions for another
Why don't you
vehicle.
finish with this, and then what we'll do is, if you want questions
stop
at the end,
there.
I just want to be able to make sure everybody gets their opportunity, and then we'll come back, okay?
I'll stop there, actually.
Okay, very
thank
good.
you.
And then Mayor Pro Tem, you'll have the floor, followed by Councilmember Cadre, and then Councilmember Ellis.
Thank you. Colleagues, when I look and learn about the budget presentation that we just received and take in the proposal that is before us, what I see and what I believe we have before us is a Band-Aid budget, a budget that has Band-Aid solutions. There's a lot of movements that have been made here, both taking from our reserve funds. We have staff restructuring. We have cuts on overtime. We're zeroing out our housing trust fund. We're lessening our facilities management fund. There are significant changes that are being made in our budget. And I realize it's a balanced budget. But I just want to make sure we take time to unmask all of the changes that have been made as part of this proposal. And I appreciate that it's a 2-year outlook, because what I want to make sure our community knows about is that we can expect for year 2 over $16 million worth of cuts to social services. We can expect that civilians will not have any cost of living adjustments. We can expect much more deep cuts for next year. So my questions for staff is just to go over, I kind of highlighted a few of the changes to showcase all of the efforts, and I appreciate the efforts that have been made to deliver us a balanced budget. But I highlighted pulling from our reserves, cutting overtime, restructuring staffing ratios, zeroing out our housing trust funds. What other transfers or changes have been made as part of this budget proposal to be able to deliver us this balanced budget?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So when you look at the elements that you just mentioned, those are planned for fiscal year 27. And those are the major items that were included in the fiscal year 27 plan to balance. So capital rehabilitation transfer, that I believe that was $11 million reduction in that transfer. Housing trust fund is about a $12 million reduction. The civilian wage increase for 27 for general fund is about $10 million, and that covers general fund and the portion of the support services fund that the general fund covers. And so when you look at those large adjustments, that is, and the elimination, excuse me, I know this is a major piece of it, the elimination of $16.8 million for social service contract support. Those are items that we had to look and see what cuts could be made where we would not end up reducing staff levels. Beyond those that are already vacant, looking at vacancies is one way to provide savings, but we were trying to make sure we did not get into a space where we were looking at eliminating or starting a RIF process of our staff. And so those are the major areas that we could look at to have an impact and keep us balanced in fiscal year 27. For fiscal year 26, when you look at many of the changes that we made, it was to make sure, again, that we had the minimal impact not only on staff, but on the services that we were able to provide to the community. And so these changes that you see, whether it is animal services, changing or reducing some of their contracted services, or the staffing changes that have been done in police and the recommendation for fire. These are things that we looked at and were very aware of. How can we make adjustments? How can we balance the budget without reducing service levels to the community? I think part of the work that was done, yes, every year we should be looking at how we can focus a little bit more in on what do we need to change, what can we reallocate. That is part of the natural budget process. But also thinking through, even with those adjustments, even with those changes, what things can we invest in? And so I think we did a good job of balancing those two things in fiscal year 26, but you see the deeper cuts in fiscal year 27.
I just want to hone in on the deeper cuts to fiscal year 27. We know we can expect over $16 million reduction in social service contracts. Can you illuminate what contracts those include, just a high-level overview of what type of programs and services we are talking about when we can anticipate over $16 million worth of cuts?
So over the next several months, we haven't identified the exact contracts that would be reduced at this moment. We looked at a 20% decrease across all social service contracts, and so upon the finishing of the budget, then we would go back to departments and work with them to start identifying what social service contracts could be impacted, start working with those organizations to let them know that this is potentially coming forward in fiscal year 27, so that we can give them enough of runway to start looking at what adjustments could be made in their individual budgets. But we haven't identified specific contracts at this moment.
Colleagues, I'm deeply concerned that this budget proposal before us is kicking the can down the road. There are some major decisions we have to make around ensuring that we are able to deliver high quality, reliable services to our community. And as part of that, we have to have conversations. We are forced into having conversations on a tax rate election, but it's not because we want to spend more money. It's because we have an obligation to deliver high quality, reliable city services. The state of Texas has changed the rules, so we now find ourselves in this situation. We are not alone in that situation. There are many other cities who are in similar predicaments that we are, and so we are going to have some tough conversations with our community in the coming weeks as we deliberate the budget proposal that is before us. One of the questions I had for you was around the wage increase, and I want to thank Scott Cobb for bringing this to our attention as part of his earlier comments when he provided testimony. You have mentioned that the proposed minimum wage for city workers will be at a 22.05. In the question that our office submitted last year, city staff said that it would be at a higher rate for this year. It was projected at a 22.28. And if we went through a 4% increase that the manager is proposing for cost of living adjustments, then our minimum living wage should be at 22.49. So can you walk us through why the proposal before us today is at 22.05?
I will do my best. I look back to see if my friends at Human Resources were here as well. But the policy or the methodology for the living wage increase is to look at CPIU and to determine the living wage increase based on that. In the previous fiscal years, beginning in fiscal year 22, and let me back up. Look at CPIU, but don't go over the across the board increase for civilians. In previous fiscal years, the CPIU was 4.45% in fiscal year 24, 6.4 in fiscal year 23, and 7.8 in fiscal year 22. And so that's why you saw the 4% increase, or the equal increase to the across the board and the living wage in those previous years. This year it is at 1.94, and that's how the living wage is calculated. I believe when we were planning fiscal year 26, we were projecting what we thought the living wage or the CPIU would be, and so that's why we had the extra 63 cents, I believe, in the plan for fiscal year 26. However, when we receive those numbers in January or February, that's when we update the actual calculation.
Okay. I'd like to continue the conversation offline to better understand what's before us, just to make sure that the information that we're being provided through the Q&A process is information that we can ensure gets actually baked into our policies moving forward. And I know we have a policy on record regarding the living wage, so I just want to better understand the differences on this one. The other area I just want to highlight really quickly here, and I'll yield the floor, is around the budgetary shocks on our federal funding contracts and grants that we receive. Can we have someone speak to how that the cuts that we received in our federal funding for grant programs and services, how that's affected the base budget proposal that we have before us?
So we've looked at, we've received a number of reductions or federal grants that have been eliminated over the last several months, primarily in our public health department. And once we received those eliminations, many of those staff, several of those staff were moved to other areas or off the opportunity for positions in other functions or departments in order to offset the reduction in funding. The department currently has some that they're watching, a number of grants that they're watching, but have not received final notice that those grants have been ending. So we're working really closely with the departments, but at this point, we haven't added additional dollars to the grant for anticipated federal reductions. Additional dollars, I'm sorry, to the budget for additional federal reductions.
So this base budget proposal does not have any gap funding to acknowledge or recognize any of the federal funded programs that we have had as part of our city services. We don't have any gap funding to cover those costs.
Not at the moment.
Thank you. And as part of the budget timeline that you have laid out for us, at which work session can we anticipate a deeper dive on the federal funding cuts?
Which work session would you prefer it to be at?
We can, we'll connect with you offline and have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem. Councilmember Qadri, Councilmember Ellis, Councilmember Vela.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. I think this is everyone's favorite time of the year at City Hall. So I so appreciate y'all's work. And I think it was yesterday when we got the physical copy of the binders. I haven't been able to put it down. Yeah, it's on in my.
I'm surprised you could pick it up.
Yeah, I was gonna say I had it in my pocket, but that would be a lie. But no, I had a few questions that kind of stood out to me. I'm sure I'll have some more later, but I'm going to try to keep my remarks and my questions as concise as possible. But one thing that stood out was I saw there's going to be more personnel that are going to be dedicated to the mobile integrated healthcare and community healthcare paramedic section. And I just would like to know, I guess, in more detail what those roles and responsibilities for those positions will look like.
Give me 1 second.
Sure.
I'm going to ask
The chief looks like he's
to
headed to an
come
emergency.
down. Councilmember, can you clarify your question again?
Yeah, I was seeing in my nighttime reading that there's going to be new positions added to the mobile integrated healthcare and community health paramedic section. I just wanted to know what those roles, the duties, responsibilities will look like. It's on page 308 of the small book binder that we have.
Now he's just showing off.
We're looking up that page just to make sure we're clear on the questions.
Great.
So the chief can answer. Maybe we could just go on to the next question,
Sure,
and we'll come
sure.
back to this one in a couple minutes.
Sure. So another question on staffing. I saw that we're going to add 12 more new FTEs in the HSO office. And then their roles are going to specifically look at outreach and encampment management. So I just wanted to get more details on that as well.
Let's have David Gray, our homeless
Sure.
strategy officer, can come down and speak.
David's coming on down.
Morning, Councilmember David Gray, Director of the Homeless Strategy Office for the City of Austin. Correct, as you mentioned in the proposed budget, there's 12 FTEs for street outreach and encampment management. I think as you and the other council members know, currently our office has 2 temporary employees performing those functions on a daily basis across our city's 300 square mile area. Having these 12 FTEs will allow us to enhance what we're able to do in the streets, and what the public would expect to be able to see is quicker response times to the 311 calls, improvements in our ability to get people off the streets and out of encampments and get them into shelter, and also help our clients transition from the streets and into shelter so that we have higher retention rates within our shelter system and ultimately can connect people from shelter into housing opportunities.
Great, thank you. And I had an opportunity to be in downtown late Friday night, not on 6th Street partying, but I was with APD from about 12 to like 3 o'clock, and I've seen a lot of the work that HSO has done on the ground. So I heard your praises being sung throughout the night. So I really appreciate you and HSO in general.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Should I go on to another question? Okay. Great. I saw, and whoever can and wants to answer this question, that there's going to be 2 positions that are going to be eliminated from the Office of Police Oversight. If you could just get more detail on what those positions will be and why they're being eliminated.
So for Office of Police Oversight, one position was a transfer. It was a transfer of a employee from Police Oversight into the Parks and Recreation Department for support in part. And then the second one, I believe, is a vacancy that in OPO's restructuring and creation of a deputy officer, there was a vacancy that was no longer needed, and so that was the second elimination.
Got it. And then you already kind of went into my last question, is that one of the positions is being transferred into PARD. Could you just go into more detail on what that new position will look like?
My understanding is going to provide some financial and research support for the department.
Got it. Okay, great. Do y'all have clarity on question number 1 yet?
So they're still talking through that, I believe. So the page that you're looking at is the programmatic page, and there's not new positions that are moved into that program area, but it is a restructuring internally. And so the chief and assistant director are talking through that internal reorganization where additional sworn positions were maybe moved from their operations or other areas within the department to support the mobile integrated health.
Got it. Great. Well, I appreciate that clarity, and if we have any other questions, we'll follow up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Kadri. Councilmember Ellis, Vela, then Alter.
Thank you, Mayor. My first question is going to be about reimbursements. It didn't seem that there was a lot of direction in this presentation about how much are we still owed in reimbursements and how do those factor into the annual budget? Whether those are from FEMA or state reimbursements or any other costs that we have put forward up front.
So we have a number of about $38 million of FEMA reimbursements that we are still awaiting final decision on. We received some adverse determinations from the Texas Department of Emergency Management several weeks ago, and we are working, our Emergency Management Department is working along with our consultants to work through the appeal process for that. Those FEMA reimbursements will go into the reserves, or it will impact the reserves. And so if there are dollars that we eventually get, that will go into reserves. If we are owed dollars, or if we owe dollars back to the federal government, then that will have to come out of reserves, because that is, the reserves is where we use the lever that we use to do most of the response for FEMA. And then there's also MARA dollars that we are still awaiting on in regards to FEMA reimbursements. In regards to reimbursements for things like deployments, that happens at the department level and not at the reserve level. And so once departments deploy, they work with those agencies that required the assistance and then work through that reimbursement process through them.
Okay, and is the MARA reimbursements the oldest ones that we have yet to receive final word back on?
Let me check in to see which ones are still remaining, and I will get that answer for you.
Okay, I'm just curious because I know that we constantly tap into the stabilization reserves to be able to float those dollars. We know that we need our emergency personnel and other forms of assistance to be able to be in the community when disasters strike. But at the same time, I think we just need to be aware that we are floating this bill for, I think at one point it was 4 or 5 years out that there were still some dollars the city felt we were owed, and that the agencies that are responsible for approving those had not been able to give us those dollars back yet. So I know it's a lengthy process that takes a lot of, formalized ink on paper, just really understanding what hours were worked, what type of resources were used, and if those are approved to be able to be reimbursed for us. But looking at $38 million that could be in a stabilization reserve for future disasters is something that's high of mind for me, that we're kind of working through this process to make sure that we are compensated for the services that have been provided to the community. The next question that I'll ask is about compression. I see that there's some cost of living adjustments that are proposed in this budget. It looks like next year is going to be quite uncertain about that, but as we have talked about minimum wage increases and other sorts of bonuses throughout the years, do we feel that compression is being sufficiently addressed in this proposed budget for the folks that are not in year one or not working for our minimum wage rates?
Yes, we worked closely with the Human Resources Department as we looked at not only living wage, but what the across the board increases wouldn't have that same compression impact. But we have been working with the Human Resources Department to make sure that we address and identify areas of potential compression as we've looked through the different scenarios.
Okay, and then I know that we had passed an item through council a couple years back about the new Workday Human Capital Management Program. Does this budget include dollars to make sure that the folks that worked for the city, took a little time working somewhere else, and then came back to the city, that those vacation accruals and other sorts of time worked cost increases are being given to those employees?
Susan Sines is coming up.
Welcome.
Good morning. Susan Sins, Human Resources Director here at the City of Austin. Yes, this budget has that in there.
Okay. And do you know if those benefits are being given to people for the end of this fiscal year as well?
We are in the process of making sure that they get in there the next couple pay periods, and they're retroactive, and we're taking care of everyone who fits in that category, previous service, and making sure their earning rates reflected of that.
Perfect. And by next couple of pay periods, do you have a date, or
Yes.
is that?
Oh gosh, I hope.
Okay.
Well, we had a Workday implementation, as you all are aware. Very excited about that, and probably in not this current pay, but probably that next pay, we can have that in there.
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
That's good to know. And I'm not sure if the next question is going to be something that you have the answer to, but there was a slide, number 10, talking about our sworn employees. And this year, there's no incremental cost to the health insurance for sworn employees, but next year it said there would be $3.2 million. Is that something that the city is having to cover? I realize these are public safety departments that go through contract negotiations. So is that something that in the negotiation we said the city pays for, or that the employees would have to pay for?
Those are our overall health benefit costs. So we just broke it out for sworn versus civilian in those slides. If you looked at the beginning, I can't remember what slide it is, maybe slide 3, where we talk about overall cost drivers, and we talked about the increase in fiscal year 26 versus fiscal year 27. So that is just breaking it down a little bit further to show the costs that are related to sworn, but those are the city's contributions as we do for all employees.
Okay, I see that. Yeah, it went from 0% in fiscal year 25-26 to 5% in 26-27.
Correct.
So no employees will have to foot the cost of the health
No.
insurance increases.
That's all the city
for
side.
both years. Okay, perfect. Wanted to make sure that was clear. I have questions about parks. I see in your slide there is a mention of youth athletic fields being improved at rec centers. I'm curious about youth athletic fields that are not at a rec center. Can you speak to, is there nuance there, or is it just all youth athletic fields?
The city does support some of the organizations that have fields that are not city-owned fields, so that support is already there. We are making sure that the fields next to the rec center get the same kind of maintenance and treatment and upkeep, and so that's why that 375 is particular for the city-owned fields.
Okay, because I know there's one in my district that the city owns the land, but there is a youth soccer club that has, I think it's a lease to be able to operate there. Is that not included because the people leasing those fields are responsible for maintenance?
I believe it's a shared responsibility. I think what we were really working to do as a city is make sure we just focused on the city-owned facilities. And yes, sir. Jesus,
And we have
come
our
on
Parks
up.
Director here.
Good morning, Councilmember. Good morning. Thank you. Yes. So the way the fields that you're describing are managed through youth service organizations, the contract we have with these organizations, and their responsibility is to provide the basic maintenance. The fields that we added funding for this year are the ones that are adjacent to the community centers that we just have contracts that support those.
Okay, and are there any other athletic fields that don't fall into either of those two categories?
Yes, we have some, for example, that are under contract with the school district. We have some, so there's a whole different way that we manage all the fields.
Okay, but the goal is to make sure that they are all maintained?
At the same level, yeah.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. And then you may want to stay up here because I had a question about the neighborhood partnering program. It appears that the dollars are going down for neighborhood partnering program. Is that something that you could speak to, the decision to do that? I see Ms.
Yeah,
Manning is-
that's not our.
TPW.
That's for TPW. So.
Okay. Well, the example in my district is park, but I guess the money's coming through TPW.
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, the Neighborhood Partnering Program had been receiving out of the Transportation Public Works operating budget a set amount each year, and that amount's being eliminated. However, they still do have programs and projects that they're delivering for the community that were funded by prior bonds, and that work will continue. And all projects that we have committed to with the community will be completed.
Okay, and do you know the popularity of that program right now? I know the folks in my district many years ago came up with this idea that instead of creating a connector street, they wanted to create a more park space pathway to two schools that were adjacent to the neighborhood. Are those types of projects still being implemented, or have people stopped getting information that this is an opportunity that they have if they want to volunteer to beautify their neighborhood?
Yeah, it varies throughout the community. We do have one public outreach person that is on the Neighborhood Partnering Program. They will still be engaged in public outreach. We have a number of community-facing programs that they'll be able to support. But we still are receiving applications, and we're still administering those forward. And so my expectation is that while this division itself will no longer be in existence, the work will be absorbed in the remaining department.
Okay, thank you for that information. And then my last question will be about the mention of Austin Energy rebates and incentives. Can you tell me about if there's just going to be added dollars into the existing programs, or if there's any new programs that the department is hoping to implement? And I see Mr. Riley is getting up in case he gets to the answer faster than.
Good morning, Stuart Riley, Austin Energy Interim General Manager. So the $3.6 million, I believe, in additional customer energy solutions rebates in this budget is for existing programs, plus we're working on launching a battery storage customer rebate program.
Okay. All right, short and sweet. That does it for my questions. I'll turn it back to the Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilmember. Next up, we'll have Councilmember Ravella, followed by Alter, Siegel, and then Duchin.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem. First, I just wanted to thank the fire chief and the police chief on the overtime reductions. Ultimately, long-term controlling the budget is a matter of controlling public safety costs. Because public safety costs are such a huge part of our budget, and $8 million in overtime reductions from the fire budget, and about $9 million from the police budget. I appreciate that, and that's going to go a long way toward closing that gap. And thank the city manager and the budget office staff as well. Those really appreciate seeing that. Question on the. We recently implemented our short-term rental collection, the new kind of system, the new rules that we set up. Do we know what those collections are looking like? And again, I'm not even sure, honestly, if we've received that first tranche of payments from when we implemented the program, but any sense of what that looks like?
I think in the short term, the move to 2 years means we're going to see a little dip because people will get a longer time frame, and then looking into 27, we see it going back up. So it's hard to say now because there's the distortion from the change in the fee regime.
Well, I was thinking not necessarily in the fee regime, but more in the hotel motel tax, that because before we had the vast majority of our short-term rentals were not paying into the system. They were individually responsible, but now the platforms are making them, are collecting the money, from, well, really their guests. Do we have that first payment from the comptroller? Do we have any sense of where we are on those short-term rental?
I don't think we have that information right now. We will go back and look and see if there is any change or something that indicates that there's an increase in revenue because of those short-term rentals being added in, or that recognized revenue. But we don't have that right now.
Got it. There was a lot of anecdotes about how much we were missing out on, and it sure will be nice to see what that money actually adds up to. On page 6, there was a mention of hard-to-fill positions, a salary survey, and looking at the hard-to-fill positions and salary adjustments for those. Which positions are those? And then again, just generally speaking, kind of what kind of positions are we looking at on those?
I'm going to ask Susan or Rebecca to come up.
And just for the public's references, I'm on page 6 where it says market study salary adjustments, annualized expenses from study of hard-to-fill trade titles implemented mid-FY25.
Yep, Susan Sins, Human Resources Director here with the city. We are engaging in a study because we really need to ensure that we're competitive with our market and, of course, internally, externally, mostly, because we do have a number of hard-to-fill positions, and we want to have the correct data to rank those positions and to recruit from those positions. Mostly, there's trades positions in there. There is IT positions in there, and just those are some examples. And we just want to make sure that we are doing the due diligence to ensure we're not overinflating anything, but we are consistent, and then gearing the rest of our compensation plan to just reflect that external and internal competitiveness.
Got it. So this is an ongoing study, not a completed study with the wage adjustments already baked in.
Correct.
Okay, got it. And again, my sense would be, again, engineering, IT, and some of the trades, your electrical, your HVAC, those kinds of positions.
Correct.
Were the ones where we're not quite competitive with the private sector, and we're losing too many folks.
Thank you.
All right. On page...
Councilmember?
Yes.
We have an answer to the hotel occupancy tax. The first quarter under the new ordinance ended June 30th, so they have another month to finish their payment, so we don't have that information right now.
All right. Thank you very much. On page 11, we have the IT, in there's a significant bump in the IT, $6.4 million proposed, and then again, dropping that back to $2.8 million, the 26-27. What that $6.4 million, what are we talking about? Could you break that down just a bit? And again, I'm on page 11, information and technology management, where we're talking about cost allocations and transfers at that $6.4 million for the fiscal year 25-26.
It's one big component of that, why it's a little bit higher than you might expect just based on general cost drivers. We funded a lot of critical IT replacements with reserve dollars last year to kind of smooth out that increase because of a different prior year issue then. And so we've tried to build some of that back into their ongoing budget because we know we're going to have to do those replacements on a regular basis. So you get a little bit larger bump this year.
And again, I'm not an IT person, but is this hardware investments, software investments, IT contracts, just out of curiosity?
So the things that are increasing, there are contractual increases, for example, for our Microsoft license. As Eric said, the transfers were kept intentionally low last year because we had a little bit of flexibility in that fund's ending balance, but now we got to bring the transfer amounts from the departments back up to the annual cost. But there are no big new increases. We're not implementing any new major systems as part of this budget or adding staff, but it is just routine cost drivers. Same thing you see in the general fund, wages, health insurance, retirement systems, and some contractual increases.
Got it. So they're not new investments. It's just a budgeting kind of, gimmick is the wrong word, but, budgeting reality. Sometimes the department's paid for them and now they're transferring to the general fund, I guess, right? Or, I mean, some of them are
some of that, and some of it is just we're a big organization with a big IT budget. So when when we have an increase in our Microsoft contractual costs, it could be millions. I think it was about 3.2 million was just related to our Microsoft license.
Got it. On page 13, there is the $8 million in one-time funding provided through the Housing Trust Fund for emergency shelter operations. What is the balance of the Housing Trust Fund, and where are the revenues that are in the Housing Trust Fund? Where are those coming from?
So the Housing Trust Fund receives a transfer in from the general fund, and then there is the downtown density bonus revenue that comes into the Housing Trust Fund as well. I am pulling up the fund balance. And so over the last probably year and a half, the budget team and the housing team has worked closely together to look at what dollars for programs and projects were in their capital improvement program, in their CIP bucket, and look at whether or not those dollars were better fit in operations or in their operating budget. And so over this fiscal year, over this proposed budget development, there was about $10 million identified that we were able to move from CIP back into the operating budget to help support this to help support the continuing of the marshalling yard in fiscal year 26, while still maintaining their current service levels or doing some increases in emergency rental assistance. We are estimating to end fiscal year 25 in that budget at $13.2 million. And then, and then we will end fiscal year 26 with zero in the fund balance because we are programming all of the dollars that are available.
Okay, and the dollars again, either obviously we can transfer general funds in there, at availability, right, at our discretion. But then the downtown density bonus, also those housing dollars that are generated by the skyscrapers downtown, those are going into the housing trust fund.
Correct.
Completely agree that we've got to continue to fund the marshalling yard. Concerned about completely draining the housing trust fund to fund the marshalling yard. And I very much appreciate the addition of, I can't remember how much, but $400,000 or so into the tenant assistance fund. But I'd like to see that as a long-term fund that is there, as opposed to kind of using the $8 million of the $12 million or so that's in the fund. So I just wanted to highlight that one. My gut sense would be that that's more of a TRE type discussion item. I know obviously we got to pass it before, we've got to make the budget before we take the vote on the TRE, but I just have real concerns with completely draining the housing trust fund, because then I guess the implication would be that there would be no more tenant assistance in the 27 time frame, or it would have to come out of general fund dollars. Huh?
Correct. And for fiscal year 27, we show the elimination of the transfer from the general fund into the housing trust fund. Mm-hmm. So that for 27, there are no funds available except for the downtown density bonus revenue.
So we need some more skyscrapers going up quick. All right. I'm going to return to that, but I just wanted to understand what was going on, and I think I do. Recycled Reads. I've dropped off many books over at the Recycle Reads. And when we say we're closing it, that's the storefront on. Is it on Burnett? Is it still on Burnett?
Yes.
Okay.
Everybody, yes.
That was a very confident answer.
Yeah. It's been a while, honestly, since I've been, but the last time I went, it was up on North Burnett. And the program, it says, will continue to allow for the expansion of the program across the library system there. I just wanted to understand how that's going to work, or what that is. And for those that don't know, Recycled Reads is a really kind of a donation bookstore that the city runs and operates as part of the Austin Public Library system. It's a great little store for those that have never been.
Hannah Terrell, Interim Director of the Austin Public Library. Thank you for your question. We're very excited. First of all, let me explain. The lease, it is a lease space. The lease ends March 31st, 2026. So it gives us an opportunity to look to see how could we either absorb that, and we can. We have book sales in each of our branches currently. And so taking the inventory that's in the Recycle Reads at 5335 Burnett Road, putting it in all of our branches, expanding the already book sales that are there. We also have Tool Library. We'll be at our Zaragoza warehouse, which is next to the Cepeda branch, as well as Passport Services. That is within that location that we will be moving that to the Yarborough branch. So we're very excited about this being even more equitable, economic, and efficient process because, and also too, which was very important, the mission of it was to continue to divert from the landfill. We are currently doing that with Goodwill of Central Texas, as well as looking to expand it with Better World Books. So our central mission still being accomplished, but we're being more equitable, economic, and efficient by having it in all of our locations.
Great. Thank you so much for the explanation. Honestly, I think we have the room and the capacity and capability to kind of have a Recycled Reads at virtually every branch, and that seems like a perfectly reasonable solution. So thank you very much for clarifying that.
Absolutely.
And then finally, I think this is my last question, just what's our sworn police officer count right now? Where are we at on the total? And I'm sorry, I was trying to find it online. I couldn't.
Uh, 1,819 police sworn FTEs in 26.
Budgeted, right?
Yes.
But what is a current employed sworn officer count? Last I checked, it was in the 1,400 range. I think we dipped below 1,400 for a minute, and then we're back over, like we're at 1,425-ish, something like that. I was just wondering what the current number was.
1420, according to the chief.
All right. Thank you very much.
And the personnel numbers for all city departments is on page 904 of the budget document.
Thank you.
We don't blame you for not making it that far.
But Councilmember Cadre probably did. But yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Vela. Councilmember Alter, Councilmember Siegel, and then Councilmember Ducci.
Thank you very much. Of course, thanks to the budget staff. I know how hard y'all been working, how many hours you've been working, and so obviously we're not there yet, but appreciate all your work that has gone to get us where we are today. And I'm encouraged that Carrie's wearing the green jacket, not the red jacket today, so makes me feel like there's hope here. I want to start a little bit by reiterating what the Mayor Pro Tem mentioned. This budget does more than just cut out fat. We've hit some bone, and you look at next year, we go through the bone. There are real impacts to people that we see in this budget, and it's that way because the state has artificially capped what we can do and ultimately what we can provide to Austin residents. And make no mistakes, these costs show up somewhere, right? If we don't bring an individual off the streets and into a house, we pay for them in the emergency room, through often APD response, homeless strategy office response, our jails being the largest provider of mental health in this community. If someone can't walk to a park, then that has negative effects on their health, or they have to take the extra time to get in their car and go find a space where they can enjoy some peace and some nature. There are real impacts to what we have in this budget, and I fully recognize that there were hard choices that had to go into making it. I'm not critical that this is the product because we were forced to make it. It's what we do with it and how we take it forward and ultimately deliver the high quality services that Austinites deserve. I do want to start on the presentation here. The health costs on slide 6, we had a little discussion of this. On the health insurance, no annual increase from the city contributions, no increase for employees in this budget. Next year, 5%, still no increase on employees. When was the last time we did increase employee contributions? Do you know?
Fiscal year 23.
Okay. And what I have seen so many times in government budgeting is you hold something, hold, and then all of a sudden you have a big jump, right? Instead of doing that glide path, 1%, 2% annually, and 5% is not crazy, but it's a significant stair step from zero. When we look at the fund, that the Employee Benefits Fund, which funds this, that is a combination of employee contributions and then city general fund contributions?
All funds contributions. So everybody contributes to the Employee Benefit Fund.
Okay. And so that's when we get to I think it was on slide, well, you have sworn health insurance here, but why that number is significantly lower. It doesn't matter. I can go back and find it, but that makes sense. So do you run a scenario of employee health contribution increases, like if they were to increase 1% more, what that would look like from an offsetting city responsibility?
We look at scenarios based on changes to the plans, and we work with HR to look at what that increase could be if there are changes to the plan. This year, during the development of the budget and months in preparing for it, we worked really closely with HR to look at the EBF in particular, Employee Benefits Fund in particular, to understand what the what ending balance we needed to have in order to make sure that there aren't any big jumps or changes either for employees or for city contributions. And so in the proposed budget, you see the policy change, and Audit Finance Committee looked at that policy change for the EBF to make sure we had, I believe it's a 20% ending balance to help with changes that may happen in that fund. And I think that will allow for less of those big increases or those big swings year over year for both the city's contribution and for employees.
And are the sworn employees, is their contribution set in contract, or do we have the discretion to increase, decrease?
No, all employees are paid by the city. So it's not part of their contract. It is a city benefit.
Okay. I wanted to get a clarification. I always mess this up. The living wage, that just applies to temp workers or contractors, is that correct?
Temp workers and our contracts.
Okay. So when we raise the 4%, whoever is at the minimum, they're getting, if they're a city employee, they're getting that 4%. But if you're a temp employee, that's where this distinguish between the 4% and the 1.97%.
The expert is coming down to give her expertise.
Hi, Rebecca Kennedy with Human Resources. The living wage applies to everyone, so our regular employees as well as our temps and our contractors. So when we raise the living wage, it raises the floor for all of our employees who are paid potentially less than that.
But if you're an employee right now who's making $21.63, and you're a city employee, you're going to get the 4% bump.
Correct.
So you're going to go up to $22.49.
Our methodology has generally been to move them up to the new living wage and then apply the across the board on top of that.
That's different than what I knew it to be. Okay, that's a good piece of information to know. So they'll go up to $22.05, then get a 4% bump.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Going to page 12. Just trying to understand why the council at first appearance, why do those costs move from municipal court to APD?
So with the move of magistration to the county, the contract for booking and magistration is between the police department and the county. The work that the municipal court was doing, since that work is no longer being done, we received a credit for that in the past in that agreement, and so now the full cost is going over to the police department.
How does that impact the House Bill 1900 issue? You know, as we ratchet, it's a one-way ratchet. Is there? I guess the first question is there ability to continue having it through the municipal court? Does it has to be through APD? I just, always cognizant of that limitation we have.
Yes, I think the most appropriate response is that's the appropriate place for that contract, because it is the booking contract for the services that police provides, and that's why it's there. When you look at the police department's budget, I know the conversation is how do we curb the increase of the budget, but also looking at what costs should be in that budget. And I think that's an appropriate cost for the police budget, and their budget will continue to increase, of course, year over year. And we take a look at how it's increasing, but as we were deciding and talking about where the most appropriate place was, we understand that's to be the most appropriate place.
Okay. This is probably a question you don't have the answer to, but I'd love to see over time, especially since the tax caps have been put into place, what % of the general fund has been funded by property tax. So, in 2020, was it over 50%, and now we're, closer to 48, or just how has that changed our reliance on sales tax and other revenues into the general fund? I'd be really interested to see. Give me just half a second here to pull up my annotated budget here. I also wanted to ask if you guys could provide a kind of rosy and a even worse scenario as it related to sales tax. So if next year, let's say we're 1% better than we thought or 1% worse, just have us understand kind of what is that cone of uncertainty where we might be, so we can have a better sense of where that could end up, since I doubt we ever hit it right on the mark. And let me just double check here. Okay, my last question is a one I brought up last year as it relates to the council budget questions. What I have experienced so far is it's going to open today. There's going to be a huge flood of questions. And then it's going to take a few weeks to get through those. Then everybody else, starts putting in questions, and we get some of those answers 2 days before or the night before we adopt the budget, which is, I find, not that helpful, because that information was needed a week or two prior. So first, that requires just some restraint on our part to ask questions that you actually need answers to, instead of just every question that you could ever think of. And I'm equally guilty. I'm not trying to cast aspersions here. I recognize points here. But if there is a way for us to say, for a few of our questions, this question is a really high priority. We really need an answer to this soon. It would be very helpful to be able to have, like, as I mentioned, a couple gold star questions that.
What I would suggest is you just answered your own question, which is we will have to show discipline and maybe prioritize for them so that they're not left in a situation where we, at the last minute, we say, well, I can't make a decision anymore because this was such an important question. And they wouldn't have known that because whatever. So let's all take what Councilmember Alter is saying to heart, which is let's have the questions, let's ask our questions. Let's not submit every question that we might get on our emails and then turn them over as questions, or somebody stops us someplace else. And then let's prioritize and say, look, if you make this a priority, I get that you might not answer some of my other questions.
Yeah. And I said that was my last question. One more for Ed. The IT question that Councilmember Vela was asking about, have we done any analysis of if we were to make certain upfront investments in IT that would save maintenance costs or other costs down the road? I know we have some old systems that we maintain that if they were converted, it might save down the road. Do we have any kind of return on investment analysis as it relates to IT, since I know that is a growing cost?
We don't have it, and I'm glad you asked the follow-up question, because one thing I left out of my response to Councilmember Vela is that we do have roughly $1 million in this proposed budget to continue the various studies along those lines. So we are in the process of doing a comprehensive study of an organizational assessment. How are we structured as an IT department? How are IT staff allocated between central and decentralized roles? What's that look like compared to other jurisdictions, IT staff to total staff ratios and all of that. So we're taking a really hard look just at how are we delivering IT services, and are there ways we could do it more efficiently. I think the part you're interested in is what we would call our application rationalization process, bringing in some consultant support to look at our literally hundreds of applications we maintain in this city, roughly 850 distinct applications that we maintain in the city, and do we need that many systems? Hypothetically, if this side of the dais was using one software package for constituent services and this side of the dais was using a different software package, do we need two packages, or could we get it done with just a single software solution, reduce cost, maintenance cost? So that's our application rationalization process. And then we're also seeking assistance at our contract negotiations. We have very talented contract staff, but when you're negotiating with Microsoft, we have one data point. So bringing in some support that do this professionally to see if we can negotiate the best terms possible with those large vendors. So there's a lot of work underway to what broadly what I would characterize as optimizing our delivery of information technology and operational technology services.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councilmember Alter. Councilmember Siegel, Councilmember Duchin, and Councilmember Harper-Mattis.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just want to start off by thanking the city manager and staff for all of your amazing work. You look remarkably bright and bushy-tailed after delivering us this amazing document, which obviously we have a lot of work to do on. And I do want to acknowledge the comments of Councilmember Alter and Mayor Pro Tem. I do think this is a Band-Aid budget. And as the mayor acknowledged, there's a statutory requirement that we, staff produce a balanced budget. But I want the community to know that this is by no means an end point. This is a starting point for an ongoing conversation. I see this budget as part of a larger political context where, frankly, we have rising authoritarianism and increasing austerity. And at the national level, with this latest bill, we're seeing unprecedented transfers of wealth from working Americans to the wealthiest people in our society, and devastating cuts to programs and infrastructure. And in the face of these assaults on our community, I'm hopeful that as a body, we can show up for Austin. We can show that as a body, we can keep Austin progressive and democratic and environmentally conscious and socially just, a place where everyone can thrive. And I also think that all of us are aware that we can't wait for others. The cavalry is not coming, right? There's no outside powers or large organizations that are going to save us. But I'm hoping that we can be the ones we're waiting for here and, show up for our values as a community, stand up for city workers, stand up for our community partners, and make sure that we keep Austin what it is, despite what's happening at the state and federal levels. So that's kind of my statement of intent here. And with that, wanted to ask some questions, first of all, about positions that have been eliminated in the budget. And I don't know if Director Lang, you have these answers, but if you could share how many filled positions are being eliminated in this proposed budget for this coming year.
There are no filled positions being eliminated.
Okay.
So we are not going through a RIF program.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And is that also true for the 2027, the second year of the budget?
Actually, let me correct myself. I think that the in Transportation Public Works in particular, the Neighborhood Partnering Program, those positions were not eliminated; they were reassigned. So just to be clear on that, but no RIFs, and at the moment, no planned RIFs for fiscal year 27.
Okay, thank you. And then kind of another big picture question is about ARPA funds. Are there programs or positions that were funded by ARPA or other grants that are being discontinued that are not covered in the base budget? And if so, can you share what those would be?
Yes, there is the case management workers in the Austin Community Court. I think that's about 6 positions that were ARPA funded that are not going to continue. I'll have to get more information from public health because I believe there are a couple of positions in public health. I don't have that information right with me, but we can give that as a council budget question and give you the full answer of all the positions that were impacted through ARPA ending.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And kind of going over to public health, I guess in the budget document, not the presentation, on page 75, it says reduction of $16.8 million or 22.5% in the budget for social services contracts. Can you share today what types of social service contracts those would be?
We have not identified the specific contracts in those potential reductions. We will work closely with the departments that have social service contracts. So we currently have contracts across public health, economic development, Homeless Strategy Office and the Austin Community Court. And so we would work with those departments to identify the contracts that could potentially be reduced once we get through the budget cycle.
Okay. Do we have an opportunity to save any of those contracts through the budget process?
So, Councilman,
Yes.
great questions. And I think what Carrie is trying to articulate and what the budget reflects right now is that the resources that would have been reduced between July and October, if we had implemented a 20% across the board cut, are not being taken because we're using the contingency. Foreshadowing next year's budget, the conversations with those entities as well as the City Council would have to take place. Staff would have to then analyze the types of services and the impacts, and it might not be across the board. There could be specific types of things that we may or may not be able to fund, and so those discussions would be ongoing. But at this time, in lieu of having major and significant impacts on what our community is doing for us and support with our nonprofits, we chose to dip into our own reserves and give at least 16 to 18 months worth of a conversation. So right now that hadn't been identified, and it will become a problem next year if in fact we do not find recurring revenues to backfill and support continuing those at, I think across the board, it's about $72 million plus or minus in that particular category, if not close to 80 million.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Appreciate it. On the Housing Trust Fund, I had several questions, but thank you, Councilmember Vela, for getting into a lot of that. I did have a random golf question. I don't know if you're a golf expert, Ms. Lang. If you could just provide a little more context for the $4 million in golf course improvements that are noted in the budget.
I am not a golf expert.
I'm
going to ask Jesus to come down.
Thank you.
Good morning. Still Jesus Secretary, Parks and Recreation Director. I'm also not a golf expert. I apologize. Can you repeat your question one more time?
Sure. In the budget, there's a $4 million transfer for golf course improvements.
Yeah, sorry. That is part of our CIP program to really address some of the longstanding issues in the golf courses. I don't have the specific details of what we're going to fund with that, but it's basically some of the deferred maintenance that's in the golf system.
Okay. Thank you, Director. We can explore that through Q&A.
Okay.
And then, my last category of questions is relating to fees and fines. And so, on page 587 of the budget, there's a reference to, frankly, very large increases in fees and fines, including library fines, traffic fines, and parking violations. And so I wanted to ask if y'all could provide more context for these estimates and, how these increases in revenue would come about.
Yeah. We're getting to the page.
Thank you.
Good morning. John Cabia, Acting Financial Manager, the Austin Public Library. I was going to address the question about library fines and fees. What was the exact question?
If you could just share, how you expect to increase, your plan to increase fines and how those would be achieved?
Well, it wasn't really like a lot of the fines. We've eliminated fines a few years ago. What we did is we looked at the fees that we're charging for specific things, particularly the special event fees that we offer. We found that we are way below market on those, and in working with my special events manager, realized that we are really underselling and not utilizing our space that we've invested a lot of money in as a city for this building, Central Library. So we're trying to get those fees more in line with what we can reasonably expect to pay. They're still well below market value. So, and we're not these are not impacting any vulnerable populations. These are people who are utilizing the space who would otherwise look at other more expensive places.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I think your question was relative to the fine specifically as opposed to the fees. In the library, I think they're truing it up based on their expected 25 values and carrying that forward. We're seeing a major uptick in parking violations. Part of that's due to, I believe, council action in February to increase parking ticket fees. So we're starting to see the impact of that already. And then I think we have just general increase in the number of citations due to expanded coverage areas and utilization. Those fees have been depressed from where they were about 10 years ago, but now we're starting to see them ramp back up, and you have a lesser increase in the traffic fines as well. But there's no budgetary target. We're just trying to recognize the trends in light of behavior and then any increases passed by council.
Thank you. Just to clarify, that's true for both parking enforcement as well as traffic enforcement?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Seal, Councilmember Duchin, and Councilmember Harper Madison.
Thank you, Mayor. Like everybody else, I want to start off by saying thank you for the incredible work on this budget. For all of y'all, I know there's probably been a lot of sleepless nights, and especially for the effort in presenting us a balanced budget that I think is going to be a really valuable starting point for the conversation over the next month. My sense right now, and part of the reason that I'm grateful for the work you've done, is that, at least in talking to folks over the last couple of weeks, I do have a sense that folks are struggling out there, and they are looking to us for some kind of direction, positive direction, to take the city and this budget as a reflection of the city in a healthy way. And so I'm looking forward to working with staff and my colleagues in the dais here to try and address those concerns regarding our spending. And so the first question I've got, and I'm going to probably start with the slides from today and then try and jump to some specific budget questions. But before we do that, my understanding is in prior years, I know I looked at the one for this last budget, y'all have helped release a list of unmet needs. Do we have something like that that you've already shared with us that I missed? Is that something in the works? Can you expand on that?
So yes, we will provide all supporting documents. So that includes the boards and commissions recommendation report, the prioritization or reduction list, and what we are now calling enhancement requests to the council by the end of this week. So we're finalizing those reports to make it so that we can share them shareable, and we'll get those out by the end of this week.
Okay, so we can expect both whatever TRE scenarios plus also the unmet needs, or as part of that, all by the end of this week.
Yes. So what we've done in the past is we've placed the reports, those supplemental reports on our budget website, and we'll make sure we share those documents through the link to the council, and then additionally the TRE discussion and scenarios will be provided on by Friday.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to jump to page 39, which I think is the capital improvement plan you guys have laid out for the next 5 years. First question is, what is in the other category? Is that going to be the convention center? Is that going to be Cap and Stitch? What's going to be in other?
Other is primarily the convention center.
Okay. Where would Cap and Stitch be, if anywhere? Or is that primarily bond to be determined next year?
I think that's to be determined.
Okay. And then just a general question about the CIP spending, which is, it looks like we're sort of entering in this 5-year window of what I might consider to be unprecedented CIP spending. Does that have a specific operating budget implication anywhere that we should be aware of, or is that entirely independent?
Some of the projects do have operation implications, and we try to include that information in the budget and brief in the front matter, as well as if there are operational increases in the next 2 years, we include that in the departmental pages.
Okay, I'll follow up if we can't find that information. Thank you. I'm also going to look at, let's see, page, I think, 22. So in the bottom right, you guys have a future projection, a 10-year annual average annual growth of about 4.8%. I saw in the budget on page 63, you've got economic forecasts where you say the growth, the expectations for growth to rise to about 2.5% annually. I think the quote is, this is reflecting Austin's appeal as a center for the modern economy. One, there's a bit of dissonance there between obviously those two numbers, and two, it does feel like in the context of this conversation and some of the data that's in these slides that we've talked about already that my colleagues have addressed, does feel a little bit optimistic. How are you getting to those numbers?
So that 4.8% represents what the average growth through FY30 would be versus FY20 as a base year. And so it's just trying to show that we'd be at a little bit smaller average rate for that 10-year period than we were for the 10 years leading up to the pandemic, and also to try to get across the magnitude of the growth we saw right in the aftermath of the pandemic, such that even if we are at those lower growth rates in that 2 to 3% range in the out years, it's still averaging almost 5% growth a year over 10 years because those FY21, 22 years were just that strong.
Okay, so that accounts for this particular decade, which you're kind of rolling back a few years and then looking forward to the remaining part of the
Exactly.
decade. What about the 2.5% that's reflected in the budget that you talk about? Can anybody speak to that a little bit?
So that 2.5, that's what we're targeting with our 28, 29, 30 projections, trying to be in that range. Maybe we're being a little more optimistic than Mr. Hawkinos in 29 and 30. But I think we're in line, especially that many years out. We're within the margin of error.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. One of the things that I've noticed, and I think that we're collectively struggling with, is how we manage our expenses as they continue to outpace revenue with our SB2 limitations. Can you help me understand what, and part of my frustration is the way that the tax system works, and I've talked about this in the dais and in committees, is that it does feel like at times we are burdening people unfairly, right? So my question is, what are the levers of control that we have in terms of fees, revenue sources, other ways that we can try and more, I would say, progressively tax people, right? Like if we've got an energy bill and we've got different variable costs or what they call volumetric costs, and we might say, okay, well, we can apply a larger fee increase to the people at the top end who are using more, right? Almost a consumption tax. What are those sort of tools that we've got that you could think of or that you can share with me that we can be exploring that aren't just applying a standard tax rate increase to the entire city?
I mean, there's not a lot. And the ones that are available, we are utilizing. So in terms of property tax, of course, we can offer a general homestead exemption. It caps out at 20%. We're at the 20%. A more progressive policy that's not available to us is if we could have a fixed dollar amount exemption like we do for the senior disabled exemption at $192,000. Obviously, if you do a 20% exemption, a multi-million-dollar home gets a much bigger dollar tax exemption than a lower valued home does, where the fixed exemption is the same for everybody. But these things are all dictated in state law. We do annually, we've been increasing, the council has been approving increases to the senior disabled tax exemption significantly every year, trying to keep those on a fixed income held harmless relative to rising tax burdens for the city of Austin. For the general homesteads, that cap is, we're currently at the cap, and there's very few other tools that I can think of really under Texas law that allow us to have a more progressive approach to our taxation system.
Okay, thank you. Two more questions. Hopefully I've got time for both. One is, in the presentation today, I think it's on 21. And I think Councilmember Lane started with this question about lagging peer cities. I noticed that when I pulled some different data, and you guys have a different chart here that, let's see, it's the chart that I think is the median, it's the median tax on the median family. In any case, just to save some time, really my question is, I understand that calculation relative to other Texas cities. When I look at per capita data, though, it looks like going back about 10 years, we were spending about $1,200 more than the closest Texas city, which would have been Dallas. Today, that looks like it's almost doubled. Last year, from the data that was shared with us a few weeks ago by you all, it looked like the average homeowner was paying across the 5 jurisdictions about $1,000 more this year than last year, or about a 14% year increase in just a single year. My question is this a fair? First of all, the first part, the per capita, is that a fair way to evaluate spending, or is there too much of a difference between cities for that to be a useful tool for understanding what we're spending here?
I think the way we've presented this was to try to tie into our median typical homeowner that we look at the year-over-year property tax increase for. I think I would want to speak with you and dig into your per capita stuff, and that sounds very interesting, and I'm sure there's pros and cons and validity and challenges with either way, but we're happy to expand the total way we look at all of this.
Okay, I look forward to that conversation. And then the last part is, and this is sort of in context of all this, trying to figure out how do we have good performance metrics. And one thing I want to do is thank the city manager for starting to rebuild, I think, because I'm not aware of it anywhere else other than some independent consulting data that we get, the performance analytics from early this year, to build out the KPIs for the different departments to help us understand essentially the performance data that he started. And I kind of want to believe this is a huge step forward for helping us evaluate how we're doing, whether absolutely or relative to other cities. And it's also helpful for me personally, and I think my team, to figure out what's working and what needs to be prioritized. At the same time, it does look like there's still a decent amount of missingness in the data sets, especially for things that seem to be important, things like 911 calls responded within 10 seconds. So I'm curious if that's something that we can hopefully work on the next month. I'm hoping that gives me, or maybe my colleagues also, a sense of where to prioritize our energy and effort as far as what's working and what maybe needs more resources, or what maybe needs to be looked at with more scrutiny, and how are we measuring success essentially. So I'm going to end with saying, on an optimistic note, that we can continue to build out that data and we can try and use that to make some good decisions over the next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Harper Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it. The beauty of going last is that all my questions have been answered.
That works out well. And we are going to go back and ask if others that feel like they were limited in their times.
No, I don't feel limited at all. I feel like Councilmember Vela most especially got most of my questions answered. I would like to echo my colleagues' appreciation for all the hard work that's gone into this process. Generally speaking, staff is very responsive, and let's just say I've been, stiff-armed, Heisman. You guys have been busy, and I really appreciate how much work you've done. The one thing I will say is, as we go through this process, in all the areas of my life where I'm long-winded, this won't be one. I really want us to utilize, as colleagues, I'd like for us to utilize the access that we have to staff outside of the dais. I don't think this is the place to belabor our questions. It makes the day long for everybody. So if we can be as succinct as possible up here, that's the request I have for my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'm going to now go back to other members. If you want to be recognized, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to go where I know somebody wants to be recognized, and so we'll start with Councilmember Lane.
Okay.
Thank you. I have a question about revenue and fees, specifically Austin Energy. I'm wondering if staff could clarify the revenue drivers that enabled the $5 per month savings for Austin Energy customer bills. I don't know if that was operational efficiencies, market pricing, commercial demand response. Thank you.
Good day. I'm not sure if it's morning or afternoon. I think it's noon. Stuart Riley, Interim General Manager.
It's still good morning, man.
Okay.
Let's see how long this answer is.
Hint, hint. No. So the reason that the bill is coming down is because we've been able to manage our wholesale power costs that are recovered through the power supply adjustment on the bill, and through that energy market risk reduction that we've been able to achieve, we're bringing that cost down. That makes up, base rates make up about half of the customer bill. The other half of the customer bill is pass-throughs. By far the largest of those is the power supply adjustment, and that's what's resulting in the decrease.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So my next question relates to fire. So we've heard leading into this meeting some concerns from the public and the fire union about reversing the 4-person staffing ordinance for fire deployment. Can you explain what impact that concept would have on emergency response?
Good afternoon. Joel Baker, Fire Chief, City of Austin. The impact, we would still be able to respond units to all houses. For example, the NFPA is starting to say 4 and 4 on each apparatus. The plan is for a 4 and 3 staffing model. If memory serves me right, on a 1-story or 2-story house frame home, that's about 16 or 17 personnel. Even with the 4 and 3 staffing model that's proposed, we would still exceed the number of personnel on the scene. The number of personnel will still exceed, although the NFPA recommends a 4 and 4 staffing model. And I think if we do the 4 and 3 model with the number of units we send, it's approximately 30 personnel we would have on the scene, or 24 personnel we have on the scene. So in other words, we would still exceed the number of firefighters on the scene, but not within the 4 and 4 recommended staffing model.
So if that recommendation were to come to play, would we also be seeing target of response time and type of coverage and actuals, maybe on a quarterly basis in the Public Safety Committee as part of that?
I'm not sure what you're asking me, but
Okay.
let me try to answer it this way.
I could rephrase. Sure, go ahead.
Okay, you can go ahead and rephrase it.
I think it's really important to, and particularly in this time with so much revenue and cost constraint, to right-size our response. But it's also critically important not to sacrifice what we have to have happen, which is effective response. And your answer aligns with what I've heard from you in previous conversations, and are part of the reason that I'm really focused on this. But I also want to make sure that if we do go down this path, that there will be periodic data available to council, perhaps through Public Safety Committee, that will show us the goal that you tell us now can be achieved and how we're actually doing.
Absolutely. We can provide that data to council and the Public Safety committee who needs to know. We can provide that. But let me add, ma'am, to all the council members. With the 8.3 budget reduction, it's either to temporarily do a staffing model reduction or blackout or brownout station, which is not the answer. If we are forced to blackout, which means permanent close a fire station, or brownout would mean temporary close of fire station unit, that is worse than the reduction of staffing. The staffing model is the best solution that we have at the table right now to make sure that every fire station, every unit is still staffed with trained firefighter and personnel to respond to these emergency fire and medical calls.
Thank you. I know our fire department is so critical in responding effectively, not just to fires, but also to medical calls. So often the first response on the scene is very appreciated. I believe that the Last fire station to come online in the city of Austin was on 620 near the Canyon Creek neighborhood.
That's correct.
Where it is a very important response and action that the city has taken in relation to 911 response times in that area. So just to confirm out here, our current budget proposal, even with the restructuring that's contemplated, will not sacrifice staffing for fire at that station.
At that station, I'm not sure if I think we have one unit at that station.
Yeah, I think it's one.
We have one unit at that station. So that station, if it's an engine there, it would be 3 personnel. If it's a truck, it would be 4, or aerial, it would be 4 personnel.
And I think that station's also critical in our wildfire response, which I know is a priority and also built in. And just another reason why I suspected there would not be a negative impact there, but also just wanted the
Well, we have a wildfire battalion that circle the city. Those fire stations are strategically placed to respond to wildfire mitigation. With this reducing staffing model, the 4-on-3 staffing model, we will have additional personnel on those high wildfire days that we will have the resource that we can up staff as needed, with little to no pack in our overtime budget, because we will have the personnel to up staff as necessary.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I certainly also agree that having the levels of staffing that will allow us to reduce overtime cost is an important part of cost cutting in this environment, and I really appreciate your attention to that.
And to add to reduce the overtime, the staffing model also give our members the needed time off versus them working a lot of overtime, so they can reduce the PTSD and stress and mental illness that these firefighters are having. So they will have more time off to be with their family and have more time off to rest.
Yes, and I know our firefighters have definitely been requesting that time to rest and be ready. So I appreciate that too. That's all for fire for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
I have just one more question, but it's not fire related. This relates to the revenue projections, and I'll lay it out. I'm not really sure who's the right person to answer. I am wondering the extent to which our budget already reflects strategic work that could stimulate new property tax revenue that is not subject to the legislative cap outside of the city core. Yes, skyscrapers in downtown and other central areas are a part of that, but there are other opportunities for revenue generation outside of the core, and I just want to feel for how much that has been considered and accounted for already in the thinking of this budget. And I'll just clarify that when I say strategic work, I mean budget dollars for targeted investment that can stimulate new development in some of our outlying areas. I would say that that is preferably of current vacant properties, both land and buildings. Again, those are easier to come by in some areas outside, in the outlying areas than others. But it doesn't just include budget dollars. It also includes the type of management level restructuring we've heard about in this presentation and some policy work that's already begun. And I know that both of those will continue during the next 2 years, which is the window that we're looking forward in. I will also clarify that when I say new development in Austin's outlying areas, I mean both vacant land and buildings that are already for full purpose Austin. For example, Lakeline Station Transnorthern development on the long ago completed Red Line Station. And I also mean vacant land and buildings in the ETJ, in limited purpose area, zoning areas, or the county that have realistic potential for near-term redevelopment with property owners requesting annexation as part of that process. An example of that would be the 45 and 620 corridor from Parmer westward across 183 to Anderson Mill Road, where in the last 5 years we have seen a low-income bubble that has quietly but significantly grown during the last 5 years, primarily through the construction of large-scale apartment complexes up and down that corridor. So that's what I mean when I ask the question, and I'll ask the question again because I know that that was a long laying out. Can someone give me a feel for the extent to which the budget, as we've been presented today, already reflects strategic work that could stimulate new property tax revenue, not subject to the legislative cap, new development, vacant, because a lot of what we hear about is issues here is redevelopment of occupied properties. There are lots of vacant opportunities outside the city core. And unfortunately, I know that's kind of wide-ranging. It might be a question for our city manager not to put you on the spot, but or you could call on someone.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And so I believe one of the slides on the screen was pretty telling. I think Eric covered it when he talked about the new construction amounts and the high water mark of $5.3 billion prior year, which was a record, and where we've settled down to about a $2.3 billion number. I think that number in itself is evident that we've got to continually focus on creating new property value, whether redevelopment and or new development in vacant spaces, one throughout the city. Obviously, the core of our city is important, where a large revenue generation opportunity continually exists, particularly with city-owned properties in some cases. And so, as to your question specifically about what is already identified in the budget, that number and those anticipated and opportunities for future growth are not specifically identified and articulated. One of the things that we'll be talking with the City Council about, as well as the community, is taking a look at our overall economic development strategy, inclusive of our housing policy and strategy, and laying that out with a forward-thinking viewpoint on exactly what you talked about, and that is how do we, one, grow responsibly, as well as identify and take advantage of opportunities that exist to partner with public and private entities to encourage more economic development. And so we'll be doing that work over the next year. Hopefully that will bear some fruit, but we are not anticipating and or putting into the budget things that we don't know are already on the ground. And so we'll continually monitor that throughout all of our departments and work specifically with this council and the community to develop that strategy to encourage more development and meet many of the policy goals that the council set out at the same time.
Thank you. That is exactly the kind of response that I was hoping to hear. Appreciate how you laid that out. And also really appreciate your near-term, medium-term, long-term planning for our needs, which are certainly going to be challenging. That's the extent of my questions right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember. Councilmember Duchin.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just got a couple of questions regarding Austin Energy. I was hoping that Interim Director Riley could help me with a hopefully lightning round of softball questions before we wrap up here.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Well done.
So I noticed in the budget early on in the taxpayer impact statement, we list that the average residential consumption is about 860 kilowatt hours. When I look at the Texas average, it's significantly higher than that. It's close to like 1,200.
That's correct.
What accounts for that difference? What are y'all doing right that the rest of the state can't figure out?
Well, it's a combination of factors. For one thing, we have been investing in energy efficiency far earlier than anybody else nationwide, especially statewide. So starting in the 80s, we started investing in energy efficiency, and those efforts have ramped up. Also, we just have a population that tends to live in more apartments, smaller residences as well. But we have a lot of residential rooftop solar. We have a lot of energy efficiency. Those kinds of investments that we've made in our system keep our typical customer bill much lower than the rest of the state, which is great. And it just creates a new challenge of getting to adequate cost recovery from that customer base. And as customers continue getting more and more efficient, I should say not only energy efficiency rebates, but we've also been a nationwide leader in terms of the Energy Conservation Code of what built new housing stock coming online. We've seen dramatic decreases in the average consumption for new housing stock, whether single family or multifamily. So that's contributing to it a great deal as well.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had was just regarding the transfers, which I think were on slide 23 for today. I noticed that we're going into this, again, kind of unprecedented expansion of transfers. It was 10 million this current budget, 14 million projected, and then 9 after that. So within a 3-year window, about $33 million. Whereas when I look back to 2016, it was at, and the 8 years after that, it was about a $7 million increase over 8 years. So vastly more transfers happening now, or the rate of transfers. Can you help me what accounts for that?
Yeah, it's again a combination of factors. One is just load growth. So our service area, we're adding 1.5% more customers to our customer base every year. So that addition of customers leads to additional meters turning. That equates to 12% of those revenues are subject to those base revenues subject to general fund transfer amount. So the rate is staying the same. The financial policies say that the general fund transfer can be up to 12% of applicable revenues. And so that rate hasn't gone up. It's that our revenues have gone up because of customer growth and because of the rate increases that we've needed in recent years. So we went through a period of time for many, many years when we did not increase rates. We did do 6% rate increase, and then we had a 6% rate decrease. So over that period of time, there was practically no change to the general fund transfer amount, but that has always remained at that percentage based on financial policy. So what we're seeing in the increase is because that 3-year average, some of those lower years before some of this revenue growth is falling out of the average that results in the general fund transfer amount being calculated.
Okay. Well, in connection to that, and thank you for that answer, in connection to that, my concern is that either over time, Austin Energy will be in a place where it's not essentially recovering its costs as a result of the increased transfers, or per conversations that we've had or relative to the storm that hit less than 2 months ago, that there's a lot of hardening of poles and other infrastructure that we need to go do, that we may, deferred maintenance, who knows what, that need to happen to make sure that we are investing in the future of Austin Energy. Do you have any sense that there are trade-offs that are happening here that we may need to reconsider?
Well, in terms of grid resilience and in terms of financial resilience for the utility, because storms happen, market events happen, we have to have those resources to be resilient, both on our electric system and to be able to bounce back and have those finances. So I think our job is to make sure that we're positioned to do all of those things adequately, while also providing to our community what the promise of public power provides, which is to provide a return on that investment to the customers who have put in this electric system, and that's the benefit that the community bargains for. And so I think it's incumbent upon us just to make sure that we are recovering our costs. This plan that we have, I've explained to this council that we've seen dramatically escalating costs in the electric industry. During a period of historic inflation, 4 years where people saw 16% increases in consumer price index, we saw all of the things that we were buying increasing by 100%, 200%, doubling and tripling. So we have an uphill climb in terms of cost recovery at Austin Energy. We have a 5-year plan to get us to where we need to go. There will be additional challenges. We have a resiliency plan that we are working on. We have an overhead hardening study that we will brief this council on next week. And so that will likely result in additional investments that will come with additional costs. But our goal is to do that as cost effectively as possible.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I get it.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. Members, that wraps up the discussion, with one exception. And what I want to point out is that when I posted on the message board, one of the things that I posted and that I would talk with the manager and our staff about doing is we now have the manager's proposed base budget, but so that we can have a full discussion about what might occur at future meetings with regard to things like a tax rate election, have the manager bring us manager alternative proposals. So, for example, what would a 1 cent increase do? And we'll call that manager alternative 1. What would a 2 cent increase? What would be the budget that would be proposed with a 2 cent increase? And that'll be manager alternative 2. What would a 3 cent increase? What would the manager propose? And we'll call that manager alternative 3. For those following along, 4, 5, and if you can't do that math, then you probably shouldn't be in a budget discussion. But you see what I'm trying to do there, and I didn't get any objection to that. So with that, I would present that going up to about 8 cents, and providing that as quickly as possible. In discussions, I think that could be provided as early as Friday. I'll mention that only because we're getting ready to vote on something in terms of setting a public hearing, and then I'm going to walk through the timeline again. And next week, on the 22nd, there will be an audit and finance committee, a special called audit and finance committee, where we will talk about and start the discussion about potential for a tax rate election, and we will be able to take those alternatives up, or at least look at them at that time. Let me say again, though, to the public, what this council is attempting to do in conjunction with the manager and Ms. Lang is put it through the prism of a very transparent process. Nothing should be, no one should think they can predetermine where we're going to end up. We today have started this conversation, and that's what I'll say. Two other things. We are going to take into account, again, looking through the lens of what are the needs of our community and how do we meet those needs in difficult budget times. But in addition to that, we've all, as a council, worked as a team to deal with the affordability issues in our community. And we get that dealing with taxes has an impact on affordability as well. So that is also one of the lenses that we will look at this through.